The Whole Megillah, an autobiography by Philip August Weiner. Chapter 1. Paternal Roots. The first half of my lineage began in a little town in Russia named Berdichev. Berdichev is a town in the historic region of Volhynia Province, now in Zhytomyr Oblast, Ukrainian SSR. There is no evidence that a Jewish community existed in Berdichev before 1721. In 1732, the owner of the town granted a charter to the Jewish Guild of Tailors, freeing them from interference by the communal authorities, Kahal. The Jewish population gradually increased. According to the census of 1765, the Jews in Berdichev numbered 1,220. This grew to 1,951 in 1789. Berdichev had become an important center of Volhynian Hasidism in the last quarter of the 18th century. As the town grew, a number of noted scholars served as rabbis of Berdichev, including Lieber, the Great, Joseph, the Sharif, and from the end of the 18th century until his death in 1809, Levi Isaac of Berdichev. In 1797, Prince Radziwill granted 7 Jewish cloth merchants the monopoly of the cloth trade in Berdichev. In the first half of the 19th century, the town's commerce was concentrated in Jewish hands. There were over 23,000 Jews living in Berdichev in 1847 and 46,600 in 1861. It was then the second largest Jewish community in Russia. Shortly thereafter, the numbers began to decline, and in 1897, Berdichev had 41,617 Jewish residents, 80% of the population. At the end of the 19th century, about half of the Jewish wage earners were employed in the manual trades, mostly in tailoring, shoemaking, carpentry, and the like. My dad was born in Berdichev in 1899. My grandmother, Nana Weiner Barenberg, on my dad's side, left Berdichev in Russia with her 3-year-old son Benjamin and her other children in 1903 to come to the United States. It was a good thing they left Berdichev when they did. The Jews in Berdichev became victims of a pogrom perpetuated by the Ukrainian army. Under the Soviet government, most of the synagogues were closed. All Jewish cultural activities there were suspended before World War II. The Nazis established an extermination unit in Berdichev early in 1941. Immediately afterward, wholesale massacres began, and a ghetto was set up in the city. It was liquidated on October 5, 1941, after all the inhabitants were murdered. In 1970, there were an estimated 15,000 Jews in Berdichev, with a synagogue, cantor, and a ritual poultry slaughterer. The cemetery was reported to be neglected, but the Jews who had returned to Berdichev erected a fence around the grave of Levi Isaac of Berdichev. I never knew my grandmother's husband, my grandfather, as he died prior to my birth. The pogroms and rampant anti-Semitism transformed the community into one of fear and lost opportunities. The solution sought by many Jews who lived there was to migrate to that land of promise and opportunity, the United States of America. The Weiners settled in the Boston, Massachusetts area. My father, Benjamin, who was born in 1899 in Berdichev, attended schools in Lynn and worked from the age of 8. His ambition was to be a lawyer, and he attended Northeastern University at night and did earn a law degree. But fate and the necessity to earn a living and help support his mother and 6 sisters, Ree, Edie, Minnie, Fan, Gertrude, and Jeanette, precluded his achieving his dream. Instead, he apprenticed and worked in shoe factories operated by his cousins, the Brightmans and Hershensons in the Lynn, Peabody, and Chelsea environs. Somewhere along the line, he became a shoe salesman and traveled extensively. On one of his trips to New York City, he met the woman of his dreams, Beatrice Pollenbaum. Theirs was a long-distance romance as my father traveled extensively. Beatrice, my mother-to-be, was kidded by her brothers about falling in love with that Boston beanpole, as they affectionately referred to my father. But love conquered all, and they were married circa 1928. While this is my biography, I feel it is important to point out some of the characteristics and traits of my father which I've tried to emulate. He was a highly ethical and moral person. He worked hard at instilling in both my older brother Mickey and me the importance of honesty and integrity. Nana Weiner kept a kosher home, and my dad was quite religious. He lay to Phil every day and believed deeply in a supreme being. This faith sustained him later in life when he suffered financial reversals that would have done him a lesser man. He lost his shoe manufacturing business and went through a difficult bankruptcy in 1959 at age 63. By the age of 66, he got back on his feet, and by the age of 70 was the president of a shoe company in Somersworth, New Hampshire. Dad died after a relatively short bout with cancer at the age of 80 in 1979. Chapter 2. Maternal Roots. The second half of my lineage began in Latvia in the Courland. My grandmother, Henrietta Pallenbaum, on my mother's side lived in Latvia, Courland. Exactly when she immigrated to the United States is not clear. I never knew her husband, my grandfather, who died prior to my birth. The Duchy of Courland in Semigallia was a semi-independent duchy that existed from 1561 until 1795, encompassing the areas of Courland and Semigallia. Although nominally a vassal state of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the dukes operated autonomously. In 1795, the last duke ceded the duchy to the Russian Empire. In 1863, the Russian authorities issued laws to enable Latvians, who formed the bulk of the population, to acquire farms which they held, and special banks were founded to help them. But the great mass of the population remained landless and lived as hired laborers, occupying a low position on the social scale. The population in 1870 was 674,437. In 1906, it is estimated that the population was 714,200. This population was made up of 8% Jews, 57,136, 79% Latvians, 8.75% Germans, 1.7% Russians, and 1% each Poles and Lithuanians. 75% of the population belonged to the prevailing denomination Lutherans. The rest belonged to the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. There was a small but vigorous Jewish population. When the Nazis conquered the Courland from the Russians in 1941, they began a systematic extermination of the Jewish population and destruction of all Jewish synagogues and artifacts. My mother, Beatrice, was born in Brooklyn, New York, USA in 1904 into a large family. She had 3 brothers, Phil, Dick, and Sonny, and 2 sisters, Jessie and Lenny. She was a beautiful woman. My mother was the most upbeat person I've ever known. She seldom had a bad word for anybody and always looked for the best in everybody. She was nicknamed Breezy Beezy by her contemporaries. She always had a smile on her face and was, next to my dad, the most courageous person I've ever known. When my father suffered fiscal reverses and became dangerously despondent and depressed in 1959 to 1960, my mother got a job running an office at a construction company in Livermore Falls, Maine. The folks were living in Lewiston, Maine at the time. My mother had to get up at 5 a.m. every morning and take a bus to work. She arrived home after 7 p.m. exhausted and then prepared meals and did household chores before going to bed. I think this strain on her both physically and mentally took their toll. She suffered several small strokes in her 60s and had open heart surgery at the age of 75 and again at age 83. Never throughout all this travail did she lose her sunny disposition. She was an avid reader. Although her physical well-being waned, she had her mental faculties about her until she passed away at age 93. Now that you've met my parents and have a sense of my roots, it's time for you to meet me. Chapter 3. My Beginnings. I came kicking and screaming, literally into this world on August 17th of 1933 in Boston, Massachusetts. I was an 8-month baby and arrived earlier than anyone expected. I guess I was anxious to get going. It was my premature birth which earned me my middle name of August. I don't recall much from the first 4 years of my life, but do remember a few incidents. I had my tonsils out, which was not unusual at the time, and I distinctly recall the nurses coming and sticking me in the arm. It hurt. I've come to learn subsequently that they were vaccinating me, but at the time, all I could do was fear them coming and cry, even though it hurt my throat to do so. I remember that we lived in Brookline, in an apartment complex called Tappan Terrace, and I got into a fight with a kid named Billy Kaplan. I must have gotten the better of him. I was 4 years old at the time because his mother came to our home and complained to my mother. I have vague recollections of attending kindergarten at Runkle School in Brookline. When I was 5, the family moved to Lewiston, Maine, which was just across the Androscoggin River from Auburn, Maine. My dad had opened a shoe factory in Auburn, and the move was necessitated by the need for him to be proximate to his work. We lived in a white 2-story stucco house on 14 Nelke Place. Nelke Place was a short 1-block street between Russell and Pettingill. The Clifford family lived on one side of us, and the Bickfords on the other. We lived in this house until the outbreak of World War II. I attended Pettingill School through the first 4 grades. It was while living on Nelke Place that I learned to ride a bike. It also was my first exposure to patent anti-Semitism. A guy named Pepsi Higgins forced me up against the wall of our house with an open jackknife and said some rather uncomplimentary things about our Jewish family. In later years, I heard that Pepsi wound up in prison. The Hendrickses lived at the end of the street, and across from them lived the Finns. As a kid, we loved Billy Hendricks, the older boy in the neighborhood, because he showed us the posters of upcoming movies. I think his father was in the movie or advertising business. There were 5 movie theaters in Lewiston, Auburn. The Strand, the Empire, and the Priscilla were in Lewiston, and the Auburn and Community were in Auburn. The Strand showed the cowboy movies and serials. We liked to go to the Auburn best of all because it had vaudeville shows before the showing of the movie. As a kid growing up in a Maine town, we walked or rode our bikes everywhere. I walked to school, to the movies, to temple, to events. Nobody's parents drove them anywhere. They were too busy working. Many didn't have cars, or if they were fortunate enough to have a car, they had only one, and it was used primarily by the breadwinner to get to and from work and not to chauffeur kids around. One of the nicest continuing experiences I had as a child was walking to Beth Jacob Temple to attend religious classes and services. I can't honestly say I enjoyed the classes, but the walks to and from them are still clear in my mind. My brother Mickey and I would walk from Nelke Place down College Street. In those days, the street was lined with chestnut trees, and we loved picking up the green bristled pods that held the nuts inside and opening them up. We were fortunate to have a wonderful rabbi named David Barrett. He knew how to relate to children and became a lifelong example to many of us. My early childhood was pleasant, and many of the values I still cherish were instilled in me by my parents. Respect for one's elders, love of learning, caring for others, pride in oneself and one's religion. A few memories of my childhood stand out in my mind. My dad used to take all the kids in the neighborhood and my cousins Mark and Erwin Cohen, who also lived in Lewiston, to the Bates Woods. This was located near Bates College. In the woods, we would play cowboys and Indians. My dad would tell us stories of Custer's Last Stand, and we would act it out. He would regale us with stories of the American Revolutionary War, and we would hide behind trees and pick off the redcoats as they marched by. We had a fairly large lawn at our Nelke Place home and often played croquet in the spring and summer months. My dad froze a section of the lawn into a small skating rink in the winter, and we learned to ice skate there. I was never a good skater and had weak ankles, which plagued me in sports activities throughout my life. Saturday was always the day we were allowed to go to the movies with our friends. Before my brother and I could go, we had to memorize the Gettysburg Address. I resented this at the time, but later in life came to realize that my father was trying to instill in us, my brother and I, a sense of patriotism, knowledge of the country's history, and love of America. We moved from 14 Nelke Place to 179 Sabata Street when I was about 8 years old. Our house was made of fieldstone and faced an old historic cemetery across the street. Davis Cemetery contained old tombstones dating back to Revolutionary times and was framed by a 3-foot-high iron fence. I could look out my bedroom window and see the cemetery. The fence acted as a barometer for whether there would be school or not when there were fiercer than normal snowstorms. I would watch in the wee hours of the morning as the snow was illuminated by the streetlight as it whipped about and swirled toward the ground. When the snow drifts reached the top of the Davis Cemetery fence, I knew that school would either be delayed or called off. It was very rare that school would be called off because of snowstorms, which were frequent in Lewiston, Maine. I recall many a winter day slogging through wind-driven snow in order to get to school. Our house had a large flat wooden floored area atop the garage, which was attached to the house. My brother Mickey set up a basket hoop, and we used to play 3-on-3 basketballs on that roof. The whole floor, garage roof, shook when we played, and the neighbors were not particularly pleased with the noise we made. In the spring, all the Jewish kids in Lewiston used to congregate at my cousin Mark's house, which was a first-floor apartment at 172 Walnut Street. We'd sit on the piped iron fence along his driveway until all the kids arrived. He lived across the street from what at that time was known as Franklin Pasture. We'd grab our bats, gloves, and balls and play baseball in the pasture. I remember most of the kids who played. We each had a hero we tried to emulate. Dave Merson thought he was Earl Torgeson, Boston Braves, and played first base. Buzzy Schultz played the outfield, as did Carl Ruch, Marv Cates, and Ray Zelch. The Supovitz cousins Artie and Paul liked the infield. I liked playing either in the outfield or shortstop, where I fancied myself to be Johnny Pesky. We all tried to emulate Ted Williams or Joe DiMaggio. My cousin Mark and his younger brother Erwin liked to pitch or play the infield. Bobby Goodman thought he was a great pitcher, and we loved to have him pitch because he wasn't as good as he thought he was and was easy to hit. Also playing were my brother Mickey, a big guy named Harold Brownstone, Gil Shapiro, Myron Bell, and his younger brother Bobby. Once in a while, the younger kids joined us. We all honed our athletic skills in Franklin Pasture. The infield was bumpy, and the outfield a bit overgrown and hilly, but to us it was Fenway Park or Braves Field. In high school, we all had to take shop. Mark made a pitcher's rubber, which we used in the pasture. During one day after a snowstorm in which the plows had created 3 to 4 foot banks along the roadside, my cousin Mark and I were coming back to his house from the library when 2 kids across the street started throwing snowballs at us. I yelled to them to cut it out. They responded by asking, "You gonna make us?" Without thinking, I yelled, "Yes." They raced across the street, and one of them, whose name I subsequently learned was Peanuts, not because of his size, which was roughly slightly larger than me, started punching me. I gave the books I was holding to Mark and started to punch him back. He had on leather gloves and was a pretty skilled fighter. I must admit that he was getting the better of me when his friend made a fatal mistake. He yelled, "Kill the Jew!" That was all it took to send me into a rage. I belted Peanuts in the mouth and nose, and he started spurting blood from his nose. He was as surprised as I was that a Jewish kid could fight. He went over to a snowbank and grabbed a handful of snow to wipe the blood from his nose and face. I pushed him head first into the snowbank and continued to pummel him. He and his friend left in disarray. I was shaking all over after the fight, but was proud of what I'd done. Anti-Semitism was rampant in Lewiston among the French kids. At that time, in the 1940s, the Catholic Church was still preaching libels against the Jews, and this reflected itself in the actions of the Catholic community's attitude toward Lewiston's Jewish population. There were about 250 to 300 Jews in Lewiston. It was not unusual for the French kids to lie in wait for us as we made our way to my cousin's to play ball. There was a short street named Beacon Street, which led to Walnut Street, where my cousin lived. Not infrequently, they would ambush us. They made sure we were always outnumbered and hit us or threatened to. We decided to put an end to the Beacon Street gang one day, and all the Jewish kids assembled at Mark's. I was the decoy selected to walk alone down Beacon Street and lure the gang out to get me. I was scared stiff, but walked into the ambush. No sooner had the attackers besieged me when all the Jewish kids raced to my aid, and we had a free-for-all in which both sides suffered bloody noses and black eyes. We never had any trouble with the Beacon Street gang from that day forward. I attended Fry Grammar School on Ash Street for grades 4 and 5. My friend Carl Rush and I, who lived on the next street over from mine, walked to school together. Another friend, Morris Silverman, lived near the school, and occasionally we'd stop by his house and pick him up. We loved recess at Fry Grammar, where we'd play marbles or a game called Slip. The object of Slip was not to get caught and put in jail. Jail was a circle drawn in the dirt in the schoolyard. If you were caught, you had to go to the circle. The kids who were still free, not caught, had to try and rescue those in jail. It was fun, and we got all sweaty and dirty and hated it when the end of recess bell sounded and we lined up to re-enter school and continue our studies. A kid named Big George, because he was big, threatened me in school with some uncomplimentary remarks about being a Christ killer. He told me he was going to get me after school and I better show up. The word got around the school that there was going to be a fight after school. I remember being afraid to show up for the fight, but even being more afraid of not showing up because of what others might think. Big George and I were surrounded by a ring of kids, all yelling for the fight to start. George was not the brightest kid in school, and he came slowly at me with his arms held out wide to each side to frighten me. His face was wide open, and I hit him in the face with everything I had. One punch. He started crying and quit. The fight was over, and I was a hero to the Jewish kids. There were other instances where the Jewish kids were threatened with harm or teased, but all in all it was rare, and we survived by sticking together. We did very well in school, and for the most part got better than average grades. The French kids were at a disadvantage when it came to learning, as they spoke French at home and among themselves, and were not as conversant with English as we were. All classes were taught in English. Those pupils with the higher grades at the end of the 5th grade were promoted to the next grade at Jordan Junior High. If one's grades weren't so good, they had to stay at Fry Grammar School for the next grade. At the end of the year, when report cards were handed out and next year's school assignments were made known, we all asked each other, "Did you make Jordan?" Most of my friends and I made Jordan. Chapter 4. Growing Up. I attended Jordan Junior High through the 8th grade. These were formative years for me, and I was fortunate to have excellent teachers. In those days, all my teachers were unmarried and truly committed to their craft, teaching. They taught the basic reading, writing, and arithmetic skills. There was no question about deportment. They were the boss, and our parents supported the teachers 100%. If I misbehaved in school, which I did on occasion, my parents always supported the teacher's position and admonished me. There was discipline in the classroom, respect for the teachers, and teachers were not impaired in their duties by having to spend precious time disciplining students. Unlike the situation in many schools today, we were able to learn and not be distracted by severe and disruptive classroom behavior. Rabbi Barrett did a lot of ecumenical work with both the Catholic and Protestant communities, and this paved the way for improved relations among the different religious groups. Rabbi Barrett was a significant influence in the lives of all the Jewish families who resided in Lewiston and Auburn. He led the Hebrew school. He formed a marvelous choir at our temple, Beth Jacob, on the corner of Sabbatis and Shawmut. He was a towering intellectual who also understood children and their needs. I recall that we, the Jewish kids, used to arrive early for Hebrew school so we could play step baseball on the stairs of the temple. This was played using a tennis ball and throwing it hard against the cement stairs. The ball rocketed off the stairs, and whether you were out or got a single, double, triple, or home run was contingent upon how far the ball traveled. If it was a fly ball and was caught, you were out. If it didn't make it across the sidewalk to the street, you were out. Sometimes, if you threw the ball hard against the stairs and it hit just right on the corner of the stairs riser and step, it would fly all the way across the street and over the heads of the fielders for a home run. The rabbi used to admonish us for being so sacrilegious as to play ball on the temple stairs, but he always let us play until almost before it was time to go in for our Hebrew classes, before coming outside and scolding us for banging a ball against the temple stairs. We all felt that Rabbi Barrett, who once was an amateur boxer and wrestler, would have liked to join in the game, but his position forbade him from doing so. When it came time for my bar mitzvah, it was Rabbi Barrett who prepared me. He was very astute, and after hearing me try and sing, I couldn't carry a note and still can't, shorten my Haftorah section. I'm sure he did this to spare the congregation the agony of listening to a 13-year-old's singing voice, which broke frequently from alto to a squeaky soprano, like most teenage voices caught between childhood and adulthood. But the pièce de résistance of my bar mitzvah was my speech. My dad authored most of it and worked with me in preparing me to deliver it. As I rose from the bima to deliver it, I looked out over the packed congregation, over 400 people, and saw my dad in the front pew giving me an encouraging smile. I don't recall the entire speech. It was over 60 years ago, but the congregation was spellbound as I began, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. These are the words of the Jewish mother as she gives birth to her child. These are the last words of a dying Jew. I talked on before the rapt congregation and saw there was not a dry eye in the house. When I concluded, these were the last words of the 6 million who perished in the Nazi camps. Think of it, 6 million. That's all I can remember these many years later, but I still can feel the pride my parents felt in me that wonderful, memorable day I was bar mitzvahed. My childhood summers were pleasant and memorable, as every summer my folks rented a cottage at Tripp Lake near Mechanic Falls, Maine. The cottages were sparse. The first one had a cold water pump over the sink that we had to prime to get water. The last cottage we had was just a step above and was named Rockamako. It even had an indoor bathroom. Tripp Lake is where I spent 7 summers from the age of 5 to 12. It was at Tripp Lake that I learned to fish, swim, play ball, row a boat, and commune with nature. All the kids used to meet at Bridges Beach on the lake because that is where it was safe to swim. Bridges also had a slide and swings to play on, as well as a raft we could swim out to and use as a diving platform. Mr. Bridges had a beautiful Chris Craft mahogany speedboat, and for 50 cents each, he would take us for rides. We loved the speed and spray as he zigzagged over the waves the boat made. It was a thrilling experience for young kids. We were all a little scared that the boat would lean too far over as Mr. Bridges sharply turned and we all got wet from the spray. We loved it when it rained because after the rain we would look under the swing sets for coins that dropped out of the pockets of tourists and fell undiscovered into the sand until revealed by a hard rain. We almost always found nickels and dimes, and on a lucky day, quarters, which we immediately spent at the store at Bridges Beach or for a speedboat ride. One of the thrills of spending summers at Tripp was looking under the rocks at the shoreline for crawfish. My brother Mickey and I would wade ankle-deep in water and turn over rocks until we saw a sudden cloud of sand or a small movement which revealed our prey. We'd collect the miniature lobsters and use them for bait. The best loved them. One of the most memorable days was when Mickey and I went fishing in front of Rockamako. We were in our rowboat about 20 yards from shore when, wham, 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 Mickey caught 3 large bass within 5 minutes using the crawfish as bait. I'm sure that day was the day my brother Mickey became an inveterate fisherman. In the late afternoon or early evening, my dad would arrive back at the lake from his daily commute to his shoe factory in Auburn. After dinner, he would take us, Mickey and I, out fishing until it was almost dark. We'd catch white perch, pickerel, yellow perch, hornpout, and smallmouth bass. Dad loved to fish. Every time he caught a bass, he'd draw an outline of it on cardboard when we returned to shore as a record of the catch. My mother was the quiet glue that kept the family functioning. She fed us, clothed us, spanked us with kind words, and let us be children in those wonderful summer months so long ago. One memorable evening, my dad brought a surprise to our little cottage. It was a puppy. We immediately named him Pal. Pal was a true mongrel hound dog, but a wonderful pet. We loved him, and he quickly became an integral part of our family. He was trained to sit and shake hands. When we moved back to Lewiston from our summer stay at the lake, he was trained to stay in the kitchen and dared not cross into the dining room. I used to crawl into his doghouse with him until I grew too big to fit. Pal was mostly black with a white tip at the end of his tail and a brown and white shading around his neck. He grew to be a good-sized dog, and we eventually had to give him away because he needed space to run and play. He had a habit of playfully jumping on people, but this was not always appreciated, and the city made us put a muzzle on him. We felt this was unfair and gave him to a farmer with plenty of space for Pal to run and romp unmuzzled. We had Pal for about 6 years before we had to give him away. One incident at Tripp Lake was the, in my mind at least, infamous baby hornpout affair. My brother and I had collected hundreds of baby hornpout just offshore and put them in a big tub of water. They were each about a half-inch long. My dad knew that they would eventually die and become quite odoriferous. We were advised that there was a game warden in the area looking for 2 boys who reportedly had illegally captured several baby hornpout. My dad, who initiated the story about the game warden, told us that there would be 5-cent fine per baby hornpout if the warden caught us. He suggested we dispose of the little guys before the warden found us. It was rumored that the warden was next door at the Brickell cottage. A word to the wise was sufficient. Mickey and I dumped the baby hornpout back into the lake. We never saw the fictitious warden, but learned in later years of my dad's plot to have us return the fish to their rightful and a natural habitat. My dad used to take Mickey and me on fishing trips into the backwoods of Maine. We went to such desolate, out-of-the-way places as Roe Pond, Carey Pond, and Lake Spednick on the Canadian border. These places were only accessible by a horse-drawn buckboard over corduroy backwoods roads. I loved sitting behind the horse and being jostled as the buckboard bumped and thumped over the ruts in the muddied and potted, barely discernible dirtway through the woods. My recollections of those trips have somewhat faded, but my love and appreciation of nature was nurtured by them. While my dad, my brother, and I, the Weiner men, were away having our fishing adventures, my mom was probably having a much-deserved rest. She and several neighbor friends from Lewiston, Auburn, who also either rented or owned cabins at Tripp Lake, played bridge or mahjong. My mother's mother, Nana Polly, and several of her sisters and brothers lived in New York City. Usually, during Christmas vacation from school, my mother, Mickey, and I would take the train from Lewiston, called the Flying Yankee, to North Station in Boston, and then rush by taxi to South Station to catch the train for NYC. It was an all-day trip and was tiring, but we loved it and enjoyed the sandwiches my mother packed and eating chicken pot pie in the train's dining car. We marveled at the skyscrapers in New York and had stiff necks from looking up at the buildings. Remember, we were 2 kids from a small town in Maine where the highest building we'd ever seen was the 7-story Manufacturers Bank building on Lisbon Street in Lewiston. Our cousin, Eddie Leff, whom we called Uncle Eddie because of the age differential, introduced us to the marvels of the automat, roller skating, basketball at the YMCA, the Hayden Planetarium, and many of the fabulous museums. When my dad could get time off from his work, he joined us and took us to the Statue of Liberty and to the top of the Empire State Building. It was a thrilling and educational experience every time we visited New York. We rode on the subways and went up and down on the escalators at Macy's and on the elevators at the Bancroft Hotel on 72nd Street, where Nana Polly lived. My mother's mother, Nana Polly, was an amazing woman. She was always upbeat and very accepting. She studied English constantly and insisted on speaking it and reading it instead of her native tongues, German and Russian. She encouraged independence in her grandchildren, and much to the dismay of my parents, taught Mickey and I how to ride the subway alone and which stops to get off and on. In those days, the 1940s, it was safe for children to ride the New York subway system. One summer when I was about 7 years old, I went to YMCA camp in Winthrop, Maine for 2 to 3 weeks. My brother and my cousin Mark Cohen also attended. It was a fast few weeks, but I earned my Red Cross swimming badges and enjoyed camp. At the time, when I went to bed exhausted from the day's activities, I occasionally would awake the next morning to find I had wet my bed. This was embarrassing to me, but the counselors treated me well and didn't make a big deal of it. On Sundays, all the Christian kids went to church, but Mickey, Marv Cates, and I went to Rabbi Barron's cottage nearby, where we spent Shabbat. I still remember the YMCA's camp motto, which was on a banner in the mess hall. It read, "God first, the other fellow second, I'm third." I'm sure there was a lot of work involved for both my parents in those summer days, but to me, in retrospect, those summers were idyllic. From the age of 12 on, I spent my summers at camp. Phil Lown, a wealthy shoe manufacturer and philanthropist, as well as an ardent Zionist, saw a need to have a place where all the Jewish children in Maine could spend their summers, get to meet one another, and live in a Jewish/Zionist environment. He established Camp Lown on East Pond in the Belgrade Lakes near Oakland, Maine, for this purpose. It worked. Jewish kids from all over the state went to Camp Lown. Lasting friendships were made, the camp was co-ed, and many puppy-love first romances resulted. I was enamored by a girl from Waterville named Ruthie Jacobson. My brother Mickey fell for a girl from New York named Sandy Shea. Sandy's mother was the camp nurse. Many of the campers' names and faces I still recall: Marv Karp from Milo, Dick Stearns from Skowhegan, Ruth and Estelle Jacobson, Donna Levine, Arthur Waldman, Audrey Saperstein from Waterville, Sue Mursky, Barbara Perlin, Mickey Silver, Francis Weisberg, Bert Schwartz from Portland, Marv Cates, Mark Cohen, Gil Shapiro, Marty Levine, Elaine and Timmy Goldman, Carol Plavin, Marty Plavin from Lewiston, Danny Miller from Auburn, the Ross Boys from Presque Isle, the Silver Brothers, Mark Lieberman, Bunny Lakritz from Bangor, Mert Robinson from Livermore Falls. There were many more whose names have been blurred by time, but the dream of Phil Lown was achieved. Jewish kids from all over the state met, and many became fast friends for life. Whenever a visitor came to camp, we'd all sing Avenu Shalom Aleichem, and then in a raucous, loud chorus, the camp welcoming song, which I still remember, "We welcome you to our Camp Lown. We're mighty glad you're here. We'll send the air reverberating with a mighty cheer. We'll sing you in, we'll sing you out. For you, we'll raise a mighty shout. Hail, hail, the gang's all here, and you're welcome to our Camp Lown." After several years of successful operation, the camp was closed and sold to private developers. In my early years in Lewiston, I belonged to both Cub Scouts and Boy Scout troops. Our Boy Scout troop leader was Sam Hurwitz. He was a terrific guy and taught us many skills. We often day hiked to Thorns Crag and honed our scouting and fire-making skills there. Sam also took us to scout jamborees where we lived in tents and surreptitiously smoked corn cob pipes with straw as tobacco. I recall getting lightheaded and somewhat ill from the experience. Our scout meetings were held at the B'nai B'rith Rooms on Lisbon Street in Lewiston. All the Jewish clubs met there before the Jewish Community Center was built. Young Judea, Phi Delta Mu fraternity, Cub and Boy Scout troops, among others, used the facility. Chapter 5. My High School Years. I attended Lewiston High School, which at that time was located on Central Avenue next to the Armory. It was a beautiful red brick building and quite modern for its time. I mention the Armory because that is where we had our physical education classes and played our high school basketball games. My high school years were academically challenging, socially fun, and athletically exciting. I recall most of the subjects I studied: 4 years of English, which included reading Scott, Shakespeare, Macaulay's Lays of Ancient Rome, etc., 3 years of Latin, and 2 years of French, algebra, geometry, history, biology, chemistry, and physics. I did very well in my studies and was elected to the National Honor Society. I graduated 11th in my class of over 200. The top 10 received Norman Dion medals. I was beat out for the 10th spot by a girl named Arlene Bukulshis, who took the commercial track courses. I took the college track, which I thought was more difficult. I graduated with a 90-plus average for 4 years, which enabled me to be accepted at both Bowdoin and Colby colleges. I was not accepted to Harvard, which I'm sure disappointed my dad, until he came to realize that Bowdoin was a wonderful and most highly regarded institution of higher learning. More about my college years later. A word about my teachers at Lewiston High School. They were all, for the most part, excellent, a fact which I didn't appreciate at the time. Miss Dumais was my first-year Latin teacher and was terrific. She inspired her students and was enthusiastic about her subject. My algebra teacher was Miss Georgette LePage. She was pretty but not an excellent teacher, and it was in her class that I lost my enthusiasm for mathematics. Miss McGraw was my geometry teacher. I love geometry because I guess I've always been a visually logical person, and plain geometry with its theorems and logic were right up my alley. When the geometry tests were given to the class, Miss McGraw would give me and Carl Berkelman, a genius, separate and especially hard tests. Carl was a brilliant student who subsequently won several scholarships and went on to become a nuclear physicist and college professor. He was in a class by himself and graduated either first or second in our class. Our English teacher was Mr. Connolly. We didn't like to sit in the first row of the class because Mr. Connolly used to spray when he talked, and those in the first rows got sprayed. He used to drink buttermilk during class, and this didn't enhance his oral hygiene, his breath, or his popularity with those in the first few rows of the class. But he was a fine teacher and taught us to enjoy poetry and reading. In my sophomore year, our English teacher was Miss Huntington. She had a propensity to constantly interrupt her talking with ers and ahs. This made it difficult for the class to concentrate on what she was trying to say. We used to bet amongst ourselves how many ers she'd say in the 50 minutes allotted to her class. It was hard to concentrate on the subject matter when we were all counting the ers and ahs to see who would win. I think the record was 102, which meant she interrupted herself at least twice every minute. This was distracting to say the least. And yet it was in her class that I learned and had to memorize the quality of mercy speech from The Merchant of Venice and Macaulay's heroic Horatio at the Bridge. Mr. Buckley was my biology teacher and also the junior varsity basketball coach. His biology class was interesting. I can still recall the smell of the formaldehyde from the jars in which the frogs we dissected were stored. Phil Weiner was our chemistry and physics teacher. He was a character who loved to conduct experiments in class to emphasize what he was teaching. He'd take us to science fairs where we'd be mesmerized by such things as a goldfish being frozen solid with liquid hydrogen and then slowly thawed, and we'd watch it swim away. We saw a rubber ball frozen solid and shattered when we tried to bounce it. Phil was a whiz and an excellent teacher. Under his tutelage, we learned of Boyle's and Charles' laws, among other basic concepts. It was under his guidance that Carl Berkelman and I entered the state science fair competition. I demonstrated how rayon was made, and Carl expostulated on the theory of evolution. Carl won first prize. I didn't win anything, but had fun competing with kids from all over the state of Maine. Miss McHugh was our history teacher. She was also the drama coach along with Miss Butler. She was a very good history instructor and a first-class drama coach. Sports played a major role in my high school life. I was a fairly good athlete and made the varsity basketball and tennis teams. Johnny Dixon was our basketball coach and introduced fast break basketball to LHS. We had very good teams my junior and senior years and made the playoff tournaments each year, but failed to win a state championship. I played both the guard and forward positions and was very good defensively and only fair at offense. I was a very aggressive player who dove for loose balls and fought for every rebound, but I did lack finesse and usually fouled out of games. My younger cousin Erwin Cohen said he used to bet with his friends as to when I'd foul out. Our offense relied mainly on the Soroy brothers. Ray Soroy was an exceptionally fine scorer and athlete and eventually won a full scholarship to play at the University of Cincinnati. He also won the state foul shooting contest by sinking 98 of 100. My brother Mickey preceded me by 2 years on the team and was a much better player than I was. He had many great games for LHS, and I kept a scrapbook of all his exploits on the court. Both Mickey and I belonged to Young Judea, and we formed a team with the Portland Jewish Community Center team to represent Maine in the New England Young Judea basketball tournament. We won that tournament, which was held in Rhode Island, and as a consequence, were invited to participate in the Nationals. The Nationals were held at a Young Judea camp in Zelienople, Pennsylvania. Some of the Jewish businessmen in Lewiston raised money to send the team. The team was comprised of Mickey, Mark Cohen, Marty Levine, Ray Zelch, Gil Shapiro, and me from Lewiston, and Maurice Weissman, Phil Nechtow, Dave Molko, and others whose names I can't recall from Portland. We rode by train and bus to Zelienople, where we faced a team from New Jersey in the finals. The game was played on an outdoor court with steel backboards and chains on the baskets in lieu of nets. The New Jersey team was larger than us and came in as cocky favorites. Mickey devised our strategy, which was to employ the Chevrolet tee on defense. The New Jerseyites had never been confronted with this type of defense and wilted under its pressure. The Chevrolet tee was named after the defense that Chevrolet High School in Portland used. It consisted of a front defensive chaser who ran after the ball wherever it was located and harassed the ball handler. We substituted freely and always had a fresh chaser at the head of the tee. Meanwhile, we used a fast break offense and Mickey led us with his scoring. I did unusually well offensively and scored 12 points. We won the National Judea Championship and were feted when we arrived back home. It was a great feeling. I had an active social life while in high school and dated several girls. The one I liked most was a girl named Terry Eccles, but my parents encouraged me to go out with Jewish girls. All the Jewish girls were my friends, and I never felt romantically toward them. Those in my age group were Janice Levine, Elaine Goldman, Sandy Rosenthal, Dolly White, Adele Brody, Judy Pritzker, Harriet Goldman, and Ruthie Supovitz. Ruthie was the bravest person I ever met. She lost a leg to cancer when in her junior year, and I recall how moving it was at our graduation as she limped pale and wan on crutches with her one leg down the aisle to receive her diploma. She died shortly thereafter. One of the more memorable events at LHS was the senior prom. The theme for our prom was an Indian motif. I was somehow on the decorating committee with Anne Malloy, who was captain of the cheerleaders, Connie Joy, and Claudie Nadeau. We all piled into an old car, I don't remember whose, and drove up to Camp Lown in Oakland, Maine, where we borrowed a totem pole. We stopped in Winthrop for a hamburger, and after we had all eaten and the check was presented, we realized none of us had much money with us. Somehow, we gave the restaurant all we had and talked our way out of a most embarrassing situation. We arrived back in Lewiston with the totem pole intact and sticking out the front of the car. It became the centerpiece of our decorations. I think we returned it to Camp Lown, but my memory is hazy on that point. The youth of the Lewiston Auburn Jewish community and those of Portland Jewish community often held social activities together. The Jewish boys in Lewiston belonged to a fraternity called Phi Delta Mu. The girls belonged to a sorority called Iota Phi. Peter got terribly sunburned, but Nava, who was a nurse, when dances were sponsored by either group, the corresponding organizations were invited. Portland is located about 25 miles south of Lewiston. I attended a dance in Portland sponsored by the Portland Iota Phi sorority. My date was a girl from Portland by the name of Marilyn Schwartz. Her brother Lou was a friend of mine and later a fraternity brother at Bowdoin College. During one of the breaks between sets, I noticed Owen Greenblatt with an attractive date. I knew Owen from Camp Lown, so I went over to say hello. He introduced me to his date, a shy, beautiful girl with glasses named Diana Guerin. Something about Diana struck a very responsive chord in me. The meeting was brief, and then I returned to my date and spent the rest of the evening wondering who this Diana was. I was 16 years old at the time. Unlike the promiscuity of today's youth, my folks always admonished me to be a gentleman when I went on dates, and although I had all the natural urges and hormones of a teenager, I honored the dates I was with by seldom going beyond the kissing stages and never beyond mild petting. I'm sure my dates also had raging hormones, but we were all brought up in those days to respect the other person's privacy and dignity. I've often wondered if I knew then what I know now, if I would have been more sexually active. I once had a date with a girl from Portland nicknamed Rita the Heater. We made out in the car, but never progressed beyond kissing and hugging. So much for misnomers. One of the more memorable events while in high school was the time Marv Cates, Dana Larrabee, Bob Setlin, and I drove down to Boston to see the play Mr. Roberts. I think Dana supplied the car, as my folks had only one car, and I didn't get to use it very often. After the play, we decided to go to the Old Howard, a famous burlesque theater in Boston. We were treated to a revealing striptease show featuring a dancer named Rose LaRose. On the way home, we stopped at a beach dance hall, I don't recall which beach, and picked up a few girls who needed rides home. The girl I offered to drop off at home was named Alice Dudash from Shawsheen Village near Lawrence, Massachusetts. She was a short, extremely well-proportioned girl and was wearing a skimpy yellow bathing suit. She sat on my lap, wiggling and causing natural biological responses in me all the way to her house. There were 7 of us jammed into the car, which I guess was a good thing, and kept us all from engaging in more advanced sexual activities. It proved the old maxim, there is safety in numbers. When I graduated from high school, I was still a virgin. During the summer months while I was in high school, I worked in both my father's shoe factory, Maine Shoes on Spring Street Extension in Auburn, Maine, and later in Belgrade Shoe Company in the stockroom. The pay was initially 30 cents an hour, but by the time I was a senior, I made 50 cents an hour, or as much as $30 a week if I logged overtime. I was accepted to Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine, and spent the summer prior to matriculating working at the Balsams Hotel in Dixville Notch, New Hampshire. It was a fancy resort, but the help was forbidden to mingle with the guests. My job was loading and unloading heavy foodstuffs on a platform to which delivery trucks backed up. The temperatures on the platform rose to 90-plus degrees at times. Once the cargo was stacked on the platform, I had to cart it into a walk-in refrigerator room, which was frigid. I got sick before the summer was over. On a day off from work, I hitchhiked from New Hampshire to Bath, Maine, where I chanced to run into Owen Greenblatt. He was the guy whose date was Diana Guerin at the Portland dance. I didn't remember Diana's name and asked Owen if he still was dating that pretty girl from Portland. He said no and gave me her name and address. When back at the Balsams, I was feeling pretty sorry for myself, isolated and hard at work, so I decided to write a note to this Diana Guerin. I explained that I was the guy she was introduced to at the Iota Phi dance she attended with Owen Greenblatt, and that I'd like to correspond with her. I did not expect a response, but Diana answered my letter, and we began a long-distance friendly correspondence. It wasn't until several months later that I actually met her again at a party at Lou Schwartz's house in Portland. I might mention here that my father was extremely active in the Jewish community in Lewiston and spearheaded the development and construction of a Jewish community center in Lewiston. Phil Weiner provided most of the financing. My dad was elected president of the Jewish Community Center and gave a memorable speech at the laying of the cornerstone of the new building. I said a few words on behalf of the Jewish youth of Lewiston/Auburn. The family had a recording of the speeches provided by radio station WCOU, but over the years and many moves, it seems to have been lost. After the community center was completed, we spent many an hour playing basketball in its gym and bowling in its duckpin alleys. Our club meetings were held there also. Chapter 6. My College Years. I entered Bowdoin College as a freshman in the fall of 1951. My assigned roommate was Peter Foreman from Rockville Center, Long Island, New York. We hit it off immediately and have become lifelong friends. Fraternities were still in vogue at Bowdoin at the time of my 4-year tenure there, and I pledged the Alpha Rho Upsilon, ARU, which stood for All Races United, fraternity. It was primarily the Jewish fraternity, but several of the brothers were non-Jews. As a freshman, I had to wear a beanie and offer a light to any upperclassmen that asked for one. Many of the students smoked at that time, and freshmen had to have matches with them at all times. I was voted into the fraternity along with Pete Foreman, Dave Weiss, Jerry Gracie, Ted Howe, Bobby Burns, Jim Murray, Norm Jepsky, Joe Rooks, Elliot Pillay, John Pritsalis, Sam Levy, Neil Alter, Bernie Passman, and Marv Cates. I found my studies difficult, and for the first time in my life, I felt intellectually challenged. The truth is that I was not ready for college and still a bit immature to realize the importance of good grades and a college education. My energies during those first few years of college were spent more on interfraternity athletics and house parties and less on serious study. My mediocre grades gave testimony to this fact. I joined the ROTC unit at Bowdoin and studied military science and tactics and marched in uniform every Monday afternoon. My second year, I roomed with Dave Weiss from Yonkers, New York. We became fast, lifelong friends. Dave and I were the house managers for the ARU fraternity house. Our duties were to wash the diner dishes, and after everyone went to bed, to wash the floors and clean the house. This often kept me up to the wee hours of the morning, but I received free room and board for my efforts. By the middle of my junior year, I finally understood why I was at college and became more serious about my studies. I finally made the dean's list that year. ARU also won the interfraternity football championship that year by beating our arch rivals, the Kappa Sigs and Sigma Nu teams. I was elected to the all-fraternity all-star team. ARU not only excelled athletically that year, but we won the coveted Puccinian Cup, which was awarded to the fraternity with the highest academic average. The highlights of our college social activities were the winter and Ivy weekend house parties. We'd invite our dates up to Bowdoin and turn over the fraternity house to them while we all moved out to the dorms. Sometimes we boarded our dates at Mrs. Weatherby's in town. She ran a respectable rooming house. Early in my freshman year, Lou Schwartz invited several of the brothers to his home in Portland for a party. It was at this party that I first really met Diana Guerin. We talked about the letters we had exchanged and were very much attracted to each other. By the end of the evening, we had shared our first kiss. Subsequently, I invited Diana to several college weekends, and at one winter party weekend, she was elected Winter House Party Queen for the entire college. Each fraternity, there were 13 on campus, selected a queen of their fraternity. Those selected then competed for the queen of the entire college, the fairest among the fair. Diana won. It was a most exciting moment for her and for me and all members of Alpha Rho Upsilon. She was crowned at the big dance before the entire celebrating student body. After the dance, we made the rounds of the different frat houses where each house had a band and a bar. Beer and booze flowed freely everywhere, and we had our share in moderation. After we went house hopping, we returned to the ARU house and went to the makeout room, which was off the bar room in the cellar. There were several old couches and stuffed chairs there, and we settled into an unoccupied chair and made out. This consisted mostly of kissing and petting. The makeout room was dark, with only a little light filtering in from the bar. Winter house parties took place in the middle of the winter when it was usually quite cold and the campus was blanketed with snow. It was a welcome break from our studies and arduous academic schedules. In the late spring, we had our Ivy weekend, and in addition to the dance and house hopping, we all went to Popham Beach for sand, sun, swimming, and a huge lobster dinner, which we cooked in a large pot full of seaweed and ocean water. We bought live lobsters from lobstermen who were just bringing in their daily catch, and soon these lobsters found their way into the boiling pot on the fire in the middle of the beach. As you can imagine, we enjoyed a fantastic feast. My summers during my college years were spent as a counselor at Camp Cobbossee on Lake Cobbossee near Winthrop, Maine. On my days off, I'd go to Naples, Maine, where Diana was a counselor at nearby Camp Sunningdale. We were growing very fond of one another and saw each other as often as possible. During the summer between my junior and senior years, I attended a different kind of summer camp. It was my ROTC 6 weeks of training at Fort Eustis, Virginia. We lived in a barracks, which we spent a great deal of time scrubbing and washing the latrine. Our training consisted of long marches in the hot sun and days on the rifle range. This summer was just a preview of being commissioned as a second lieutenant at my college graduation and returning to Fort Eustis for the training as a transportation officer prior to my being assigned to the 98th Transportation Company outside of Bordeaux, France. But more about that later. Throughout my 4 years of college, I used to go to Portland and later to Clark University to see Diana. One of the more memorable evenings I experienced was when I went to Portland and Diana and I decided to go to an early movie. She was babysitting for her younger brother Jerry at the time. She asked the women who lived upstairs from their apartment at 13 Codman Street to watch Jerry while we went out for a few hours. We arrived back from the movie in the early evening about 9 p.m. Waiting for us in his pajamas was Diana's father, Harry, and he was furious. With hands on hips, he yelled at Diana for leaving her brother and then turned his wrath on me, shouting that there are some things you don't learn in books and essentially, get out of my house. I was devastated, and Diana was in tears as I left. Back at Bowdoin, I wrote a letter of apology to Mr. Guerin the following day and was so upset that I flunked my history exam. Mr. Guerin, much to my surprise, responded to my letter and invited me to come to his home and see Diana again if I so desired. I did continue to see Diana and also built a nice relationship with my future father-in-law, Harry, and mother-in-law, Shirley Guerin. Harry would often let me use his car on dates with Diana, and I appreciated this muchly. In the early 1950s, the Guerins had a small log cottage on Little Sebago Lake in Gray, Maine. On my days off, I'd visit them and take Diana for rowboat rides on the lake. It was idyllic. After we were married, Diana and I stayed one night at the Guerin cottage. The walls extended up about 6 feet, and there were no ceilings on the rooms. All the bedrooms, there were 3, were far less than private, as every sound made could be heard over and through the short walls and ceilingless rooms. Diana and I behaved that night, but her younger brother Jerry rocked back and forth in his squeaky bed. It was hard to tell where the rocking sound was coming from, and Diana and I were mortified that her folks would think it emanated from our room. Diana and I were becoming quite serious with one another, but she had 2 more years of college at Clark University, and I was leaving for a 2-year tour of duty in the Army shortly after my graduation from Bowdoin. We agreed that each could date others, and after my Army stint, if we still felt the same way about each other, we could take it from there. So I went off to the Army and a tour of duty in France while Diana finished her last 2 years at Clark and enjoyed the social life of the college as well as its academic advantages. She was elected to Phi Beta Kappa in her junior year. She majored in art and graduated with honors. Chapter 7. My Army Years. I graduated from Bowdoin in 1955 and received orders shortly thereafter to report for active duty at the Army's Transportation Corps Center at Fort Eustis, Virginia. While at Fort Eustis, I lived in the BOQ, Bachelor Officers' Quarters, and attended classes daily as part of TOBAC number 26, Transportation Officers Basic Course. I graduated 9th in a class of over 100. After graduation, we all anxiously awaited for our orders to be posted. Mine arrived, and I learned that I was assigned to Bassans, France. A search of an atlas, we didn't have the internet or Google yet, revealed that Bassans was a suburb of Bordeaux, known as the Petit Paris in the southern part of France on the Garonne River. I had a brief furlough at home and then went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, awaiting detailed orders to France. I received them and learned I was to fly on a MATS, Military Air Transport System, flight to Frankfurt, Germany, and proceed by train to Bordeaux, France. I notified Diana, and she came to New York and stayed with Sharon Portman, who my brother Mickey was dating at the time and eventually married. My parents came to New York, and we all went out to a fine restaurant for my bon voyage dinner. Diana and I went back to Sharon's apartment and talked into the wee hours of the morning. It was a sad time for both of us as we realized we'd be apart for close to 2 years. I caught a bus back to Fort Dix at about 6 a.m. and by noon was packed and on an airplane for Germany. Upon arrival in Frankfurt, Germany, we were taken to a hotel near the train station where we were billeted until our orders came through, detailing how we were to go to Bassans, France. I felt very uncomfortable in Germany. It was only 10 years since the end of the war and the Holocaust, and signs everywhere in German, Herren und Damen, made me uneasy. I couldn't forget what these people had done to my Landsmen, and I was suspicious of everyone. My orders finally arrived, and I was happy to board an overnight train to Bordeaux and get out of what was left of the Third Reich. While in Germany, I learned that a second lieutenant from Eugene, Oregon, was also assigned to Bassans. We met. His name was Jim Roberts. We became lifelong friends. At the Bordeaux train station, we were met and escorted to Bassans, where we met our company commander, First Lieutenant Lee B. Filmon. He turned out to be a terrific guy. Camp Bassans was located across the Garonne River from Bordeaux, and Jim Roberts and I stayed in a small hotel in downtown Bordeaux. There were no BOQ accommodations at the base. The hotel where we lived was a family-operated inn-like place. We subsequently learned that it also served as a house of ill repute, but declined to partake of the professional services it offered. The hotel was located not far from the Bordeaux Opera House, a magnificent structure. I saw a show entitled Colorado. It was in French, of course, and was a poor version of the show Oklahoma. While living in Bordeaux, I drank my fair share of Vin Rouge Ordinaire. I'm sure that this partaking of cheap wine and the long nights filled with black coffee at Nodex operations, hear Nodex discussion shortly, contributed to my stomach problems later in life. My duties at Camp Bassins, the home of the 98th Transportation Company, were mess officer, TI&E, troop information and education officer, and platoon officer. There were 3 officers at Bassins, Lee Philman, Jim Roberts, and myself. There were several non-coms, all of whom were characters and career soldiers who loved to booze it up. Sergeant Floyd was a physical education nut who led calisthenics every morning and did his one-hand push-ups while all the troops struggled with two-hand push-ups. Sergeant Clark was an excellent non-com when sober. Our first Sergeant Ellis was the guy who kept everyone in line and really ran the camp. Jim and I tired of the hotel and rented a small stucco house in Le Bouscat, a suburb of Bordeaux. We lived at 33 Rue de Pressance and bought a Simca automobile together as our mode of transportation to and from Bassins. I was wondering what the purpose of the 98th TC was when I learned of a field exercise in which we were an active participant. It was called NODEX for short, or New Over the Beach Discharge Exercise in full. The basic assumption behind the exercise was that the major French ports would be obliterated in an atomic first strike by the Soviets, and in order to supply our troops in Europe, we would have to bring in supplies over unimproved beaches with no harbors. Remember, this was 1956 and the height of the Cold War between the U.S. and USSR. The 98th was a railhead company. We received orders to proceed to a place near the French coast and set up a temporary tent city. We would do this, and the officers, the 3 of us, would live in a squad tent throughout the entire NODEX operation. It was, in today's parlance, a 24/7 operation. Meanwhile, 3 ships loaded with actual supplies for our bases in ADSEC, Advanced Section in Europe, received orders diverting them from their original port destinations to a point off the French coast. As the ships headed for this coastal point, truck companies throughout Europe received orders directing them to that same point. Liaison was established with the local chef de gare, head of the rail station, closest to the coastal point where the ships were headed. Our bivouac area was always near the rail station and the coast. As the ships approached the coast and anchored off the unimproved coastline, their cargo was offloaded onto litterage and taken ashore, where it was stacked in a transit area on or near the beach. It was then loaded onto trucks, the ones that came from all over Europe, and transported to our railhead, where members of the 98th Railhead Company, my company, offloaded the cargo from the trucks into the rail cars. We had several stevedore gangs engaged in this arduously physically challenging task, and they performed extremely well. We worked around the clock in all kinds of weather. I often had the night shift and was the officer in charge of the entire railhead operation during my shift. My primary MOS, military occupation specialty, was 0804 or stevedore officer. I was responsible for assuring that the loaded cargo was properly blocked and braced so it wouldn't shift in transport. We had carloads of ammunition as well as pallets of sea rations which were being shipped to U.S. bases all over Europe. I was responsible also for assuring that the documentation was in order and the loaded freight cars were properly sealed and marked. It was quite a lot of responsibility for a 22-year-old to have, but that is what I was trained for. During my shift, I was literally responsible for millions of dollars worth of supplies being properly loaded into freight cars, properly documented, and sent to the proper destination in either COMZ, the communication zone, or ADSEC, the advanced bases, in the eastern part of Europe facing the Soviets and charged with stopping any aggression from them. This all happened during the height of the Cold War. While in France, I went on several NODEX operations and spent a great deal of time in the field. Being in the field was not fun. Our living conditions were minimal. During the rainy seasons, which seemed to be always, our feet would get wet and our clothes caked with mud. This led to a foot fungus infection, which I still have over 50 years later. Our dining facilities consisted of a field mess tent. Our latrine facilities consisted of temporary wooden stepped platforms with 50-gallon drums beneath the platform. Seats were cut into the platform upon which we sat to conduct our business. Privacy was unheard of. Powder was liberally spread around the seats to prevent the spread of crabs, which many of the troops acquired from the local entertainment. When the drums were half full, they would be removed by the latrine detail, and gasoline would be poured into them, and they would be set afire until only ashes remained. I participated in Nodex operations along the entire French coast. One operation was in Brittany near a town called Vannes. Another was near Saint-Nazaire. Another was in the south near Bayonne on the Bay of Biscayne. One was held in Soulac. I particularly recall a humorous incident that happened while we were stationed on a Nodex operation. We had a small one-holer latrine tent set up at the railhead. Near the tent, we had a huge pit excavated into which we threw trash from our operations. When the pit was almost full, we ignited it to burn the trash. On one particular day, while the latrine was in use, the trash exploded and spewed debris and sparks over the railhead and blew the latrine tent askew. Its occupant came running out with his trousers at half-mast and his face ashen. It was a hilarious sight. It turns out that an unexploded German 88mm shell left over from the war was at the bottom of our trash pit, and the heat from the fire detonated it. About halfway through my tour of duty, our base at Bassens was closed and we were moved to Périgueux. This was a delightful town in the heart of the Périgord region, and the food was superb. The onion soup at the local hotel was magnificent, and we ended most days in the garrison, sipping a Pernod and having soup d'onion. Jim Roberts and I shared a 2-room apartment in a private home on the outskirts of Périgueux. We sold our Simca and bought 2 flaming red Opals. In retrospect, it was amazing that in the nearly 2 years we shared living quarters and cars, Jim and I never had an argument. All the while in France, I kept up a running correspondence with Diana. We exchanged letters and tape recordings. I wrote some poetry and sent it to her occasionally. As a graduation gift, her father cashed in a bond he bought for Diana when she was a baby and sent her to France with 2 of her schoolmates and the mother of one who served ineffectively, it turned out, as a chaperone. Diana had an uncle who lived in Paris, and I contacted him and introduced myself by telephone. I took some time off as my leave had accrued, as I was saving it for when Diana came to France. Uncle Sam invited me to stay with him in Paris. I drove from Bordeaux to Paris and met Uncle Sam. I stayed at his apartment one night, and then we drove to Le Havre to await the arrival of the ocean liner Arosa Sun and Diana. It was a thrilling time greeting Diana after being apart for over a year and a half. We drove to Uncle Sam's apartment where Diana was staying while in Paris. I had rented a hotel room nearby. Diana and I went out on the town, spent some time in a passionate reunion at my hotel, and realized we were deeper in love than ever. Diana returned to Uncle Sam's apartment around 3 a.m. The next day, we made plans for Diana to meet up with Mrs. Bussard and the other girls with whom she was traveling. Diana and I were to tour for a week, and then Diana was to reunite with her group at Carcassonne at an agreed-upon time. We traveled to Périgueux, where I showed Diana where I lived and worked. We went to one of the Nodex sites. We traveled to Biarritz and Saint-Jean-de-Luz and drove through Spain down to Madrid. In Madrid, we stayed with some relatives of Uncle Sam by the name of Alvarado. The daughter, Cuca, who was about Diana's age, took us on a tour of Toledo and El Greco's studio. She pointed out an old synagogue and advised us that that was where Jews used to pray when they were in Spain. She had no clue that we were Jewish or what a Jew was. Cuca spoke no English, and we spoke no Spanish, but we managed to communicate in broken French. She was a practicing Catholic, and we did visit some magnificent churches. She genuflected and crossed herself as we entered. When Diana and I simply bowed our heads in respect, she must have assumed we were renegade Protestants. Much to her credit, she tolerated us and continued to be pleasant and friendly. Diana and I left Madrid and drove to Barcelona. We stayed at a hotel on the main street and were kept awake all night by roving, milling, celebrating throngs of people. From Barcelona, we drove over the Pyrenees toward Carcassonne and Diana's scheduled reunion with her travel mates. The road through the mountains was serpentine and dangerous, and we saw several herds of wild horses that we feared would run us off the road and into oblivion. They didn't, and we arrived safely in Carcassonne at the appointed time. Diana and I parted, and she continued touring with her friends, while I returned to Army life and another Nodex operation. Mrs. Bossard had a close relative who lived in Zurich, Switzerland, and that was where Diana and her friends were going to stay after touring Italy and other cities. I still had some leave time left and made plans to reunite with Diana at Mrs. Bossard's relative's house. Her relative was Heinrich Potter, a renowned architect who lived in a beautiful home at 9 Klein Albus in Zurich. Mr. Potter treated us all to dinner shortly after my arrival there. I slept on a mattress on the floor at his house. The following day, Diana and I took off by ourselves for a 7-day tour. The girls with whom Diana traveled were green with envy. Mrs. Bossard looked disapprovingly at us, an unmarried couple preparing to spend another week together traveling. We drove through the Swiss Alps over the Susten Pass. It was magnificent. We picnicked on bread, cheese, and wine and camped out in a pup tent that I borrowed from the Army. Although Diana had toured Italy with her friends, I had never been there, and we traveled along the eastern shore of Italy to Rimini, where we slept on the beach. We then traveled across Italy to Naples and Pompeii and climbed Mount Vesuvius. We drove north to Rome and visited the Vatican, St. Peter's, and many of the sites. We toured Venice and stayed at a pensione nearby. From Italy, we drove west through Monte Carlo and were singularly impressed with Princess Grace's castle and the gambling casinos. We stopped at a campsite along the Riviera and were kept up all night by a loud, snoring German camper. We arrived back at Perigueux, and Diana got on a train for Le Havre and her boat trip home with her friends whom she was meeting at the ship. Diana and I had pretty much agreed that we would marry sometime after my return from the Army when I got situated. At last, my orders came to travel back to the States. It was in late October 1957, and I was transported by ship on the USNS General Buckner from Bremerhaven. I was now a first lieutenant, and so I shared a stateroom with a major who was also returning to the States. The trip home in the North Atlantic was rough, and I recall the waves breaking over the deck at the bow of the ship. After several days at sea, we approached the coastal waters of the United States. As we moved slowly into the harbor, we could see the Statue of Liberty. It was a thrilling moment, and there wasn't a dry eye on the ship. There was a military band playing on the pier as we docked, and thousands of people were jammed along the wharf to greet us. I saw my dad and brother standing there and waving. It was a wonderful moment. I was glad to be back in the States and in the bosom of my family. My military serial number was 04051480. I was honorably discharged from the Army in November 1957 and placed on active reserve officer status. Chapter 8. Marriage and Main Shoes. I officially proposed to Diana one night in November as we sat in my car, the red Opel, which I had shipped home, at the head of Conant Avenue in Auburn, Maine. My folks had moved from their home in Lewiston to this address while I was on military duty overseas. It was a beautiful evening with a full moon, and I presented Diana with a diamond ring that my dad and I had selected in New York. It was a wonderful moment. We drove to Portland to share the great news with Diana's parents. Our engagement came as no surprise to anyone. Leo Munsat was visiting the Garens in Portland when we arrived to share the news. Leo was the closest person to the brother that Harry, Diana's father, had never had. Leo was a jeweler, and he immediately took out a lupe from his pocket and examined Diana's ring. It passed the test and was proclaimed a near-perfect diamond. Harry owned and operated the Graymore Hotel on 21 Preble Street in Portland. We had our wedding ceremony there on January 19th, 1958. It was a snowy winter day. The wedding was a formal affair, and I was in black tie and tuxedo, as were the ushers and principal participants. Diana was gorgeous in her wedding gown, and everyone had a magnificent time. We were married by Rabbi Barrett from Lewiston and Rabbi Bennett from Portland. Many of my Bowdoin College buddies were there, and we danced a wild hora. My Nana Weiner, age 93, attended, as did Diana's grandparents, Zeta and Bubby Guerin. After the ceremony, dancing and feasting, we were driven to Boston, where we spent our first night as man and wife at a first-class hotel overlooking the Boston Commons. The following morning, we boarded a plane for St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. We had a fantastic time in the Virgin Islands. We drank rum and got silly. We danced the limbo to the beat of steel drums far into the night. We basked in the Caribbean sun and waters. We got sunburned and acquired deep tans. When our honeymoon was over, we returned to reality and a failing shoe business. Diana and I set up housekeeping in a small second-floor apartment on Main Street in Lewiston, Maine. I was employed by my dad's main shoe company and was earning $100 a week. The business was in disarray and was failing. Competition from offshore companies was eating into the U.S. market, and Main Shoe Company could not compete. My father was forced into bankruptcy, suffered from deep depression, and the plant closed, and I was an unemployed newlywed. Meanwhile, as all this was happening, I took my brother-in-law Jerry to a Red Sox game at Fenway Park in Boston. It was a doubleheader. I passed out at the game and was losing blood. We drove home to Portland, and I had Diana's other brother, Meir, drive me home to Lewiston. I had developed a bleeding ulcer and was hospitalized. My brother Mickey was married in June of that year, 1958, and I was unable to attend the wedding, which was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, because I was hospitalized at the time. I believe my ulcer problem started when I was in the service consuming wine and black coffee and working endless hours. Anyway, I seemed to have gotten things under control health-wise and was fit enough to apply for a job with the public finance company on Court Street in Auburn. I got the job, which paid about $80 a week plus mileage. My job was to chase delinquent accounts and get them to make overdue payments. I drove all over the mid-southern part of Maine in pursuit of delinquents. Meanwhile, Diana got a job as a teacher in a two-room schoolhouse in Hebron, Maine. Between the two of us, we eked out a living. One night, we decided that we needed to better ourselves and committed to make whatever sacrifices were necessary for me to attend law school. I applied to Portland University School of Law, now the University of Maine Law School, and was accepted. We moved to Portland in 1959 into an apartment provided by Diana's father on 11A Hunt Street. It was a second-floor apartment and consisted of a tiny kitchen, small living dining area, study, and bedroom with a full bath. In order to earn the rent, Harry provided the apartment rent-free. I collected rent from the other apartments and from tenants in Harry's other apartment buildings in Portland. My studies went well, and I topped several of my courses and was awarded Bancroft Whitney Law volumes. In the summer of my first year of law school, Diana and I went on a camping trip with my brother Mickey and Sharon. We rented a pop-up trailer camper, which we towed behind my car. We drove north into the wilds of Maine. North of Moosehead Lake, we found a serene campsite on the shores of Seboomook Lake. We swam in the lake and fished near Seboomook Falls. We were in the wilderness of Maine and needed ice to keep our food and milk fresh. Mick and Sharon left to drive to Greenville to buy ice one morning. They were gone for several hours. My first son, Jimmy, was conceived in their absence. We threw darts at a dartboard that we brought with us to determine who would clean up after meals. It was great fun and cemented our lifelong relations with each other. Chapter 9. Parenthood. On April 15th of my second year of law school, my oldest son Jimmy was born. He was, and is, one of the greatest joys of our lives. Before he was 1 year old, he would stand in his crib or playpen and holding onto the railing to support himself and shout, "Hooray!" It was one of his first words. I'd attend classes, come home, and study with Jim looking on or sleeping in the room in which I often studied. After dinner, I'd go to the Graymore Hotel on 21 Preble Street in Portland, where I worked as a host in the nightclub. Diana's father, Harry, owned the hotel, which had shows and striptease acts and generally packed him in. I'd arrive home after 1 or 2 in the morning and have to hang my clothes out the window because they reeked of smoke. I'd then study for a few hours and catch a few hours sleep before going to classes in the morning. While I was in my last year of law school, the school was absorbed into the University of Maine system and became the University of Maine School of Law. Today, it is considered one of the outstanding law schools in New England. I was approached by one of my law professors who advised me that someone in Boston was interested in talking with me about a position with the government. He gave me an address in Boston that I should go to at a certain time and date. I complied and when in Boston was ushered into a nondescript office located in the post office. The interview lasted for over an hour, and when it was over, I had to sign non-disclosure agreements. I was informed that when I graduated and passed the Maine bar exam, I would be contacted. Meanwhile, soon after the interview, I was invited to Washington, D.C. at government expense, where I underwent 3 days of interviews and extensive testing. I returned home and heard nothing more until I graduated and passed the Maine bar almost a year later. I'd set up a law office in the Graymore Hotel and was busy handling driving violation cases and drunk and disorderly cases. Most of my clients were employees and relatives of employees of my father-in-law Harry's hotel. I had many clients who couldn't afford to pay anything, and Diana and I were struggling to make a living. The reality of the situation was that I didn't have any professional connections and was clueless as to how to set up a law practice. The phone rang. It was Washington calling. They offered me a job with a GS7 rating at $6,700 a year. Jimmy was 3 years old and Diana was just pregnant with our second child. We couldn't wait to get out of Portland and have a steady, although modest, income. We moved to a small 2-floor apartment in Arlington, Virginia, in a development called Fairlington on South Columbus Avenue. I started my career with the Central Intelligence Agency. Our second child, Rachel, was born in 1963 on May 30th in Washington, D.C. She was a beautiful child. My dad called her Dreamy Eyes. My work required that I do some traveling. It was interesting work, and I loved what I was doing. The world was our oyster. We had 2 wonderful children, I loved my job, and John Kennedy was in the White House and exuded hope and optimism in the free world. The country plunged from high hopes to deep despair and mourning when President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. We were all in a state of shock. Vice President Lyndon Johnson assumed the presidency, and it wasn't long before the nation was deeply embroiled in the Vietnam War. I had a career opportunity in California, and we moved to San Jose. Diana was pregnant with our 3rd child at that time and couldn't travel, so I drove across the country in 5 days with Jimmy, who was just over 3 years old at the time. We were rear-ended at a stop sign by a car in Texas, but survived in good shape and were able to continue on to California. I rented an apartment in a 4-plex on Concord Avenue between Bascom and Moorpark Avenues in San Jose, and Diana flew out with Rachel a few days later to join me. I continued to work and travel for the government. Peter was born in San Jose to complete our family. He was a beautiful baby. We had to take him back to the hospital a day after he was born because he was quite jaundiced. They took a blood sample from his tiny heel. He recovered very quickly and grew into a happy, healthy child. Within a year after Peter's birth, I was offered a job in private industry with a small company in Los Angeles by the name of Astrophysics. I faced a dilemma. I was now a GS11, making about $11,000 a year, and I loved my job. But I saw an opportunity to better myself and my family and accepted the position for $17,000 a year. This was a substantial increase and eventually enabled me to purchase our first home. We rented a small but lovely home on Malcolm Avenue in Los Angeles. It had lemon trees growing in the backyard and a place for the kids to play. Jerry Kay, a longtime friend from Lewiston, Maine, moved into the LA area not far from us and bought a swing set for the kids. The set was set up in our backyard, and the kids loved to play on it. Within a year, we moved from Malcolm Avenue to our first owned home on Corinth Avenue in the Palms section of West LA, not far from Mar Vista and only a few miles from the Pacific Ocean and Santa Monica. It was a happy time in our lives. Our 3 children were happy and healthy and enjoyed school. They played with friends in the neighborhood. We became fast friends with the Coomer family, who lived 2 houses down from ours. I stayed with astrophysics for 2 years and supplemented my income by teaching procurement courses for UCLA at the North American Aviation Facility in Downey, California. But while I enjoyed my work at astrophysics, it was clear that the company was not going to grow and my professional opportunities would be limited. I applied to Litton Industries, a huge growing multinational firm heavy into defense products as well as commercial products. I was hired at slightly more pay than I was getting at astrophysics and embarked on an 8-year career with Litton. I first worked at Litton's Data Systems division in Van Nuys in the San Fernando Valley, negotiating major subcontracts on several large defense programs such as the TACFIRE program and the AWACS program. The former was a computerized tactical fire direction center, which the Marines procured to use for their artillery in the front lines. The AWACS program was, and still is, an airborne warning and control system. It has matured significantly since I worked on the program back in the mid-60s. I worked long hours and was under constant pressure to meet deadlines and finalize contractual negotiations. I awoke one morning in 1969 coughing up blood and eliminating it both orally and rectally. Diana rushed me to the emergency room of the Santa Monica Hospital, where I was placed into the emergency ward. I passed out. The doctors could not stop the bleeding and early the next morning operated on me to stop the bleeding. I had a severe case of a bleeding duodenal ulcer. I was in very serious condition, but after receiving 13 transfusions, I slowly recovered. The Litton medical plan paid for all my expenses and continued to pay my salary. I had a relapse when it was discovered I had received a bad transfusion and contracted hepatitis C. I fully recovered. Litton won the largest shipbuilding contract to be awarded at the time. It was for 30 Spruance-class DD-963s destroyers, which were to be state-of-the-art and propelled by gas turbine engines. I was promoted to Director of Major Ship Systems subcontracts and transferred to El Segundo. This was a suburb of Los Angeles, and an easier commute for me than Van Nuys. My job was preparing and negotiating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars with such giants of the industry as General Electric and Pratt Whitney. I had a staff of over 50 people and was now making over $25,000 a year and enjoying good health and my family. Chapter 10: The Camper Years. Raindrops are falling on my head. After recovering from my illness, Diana and I decided to change our lifestyle somewhat and bought a VW pop-top camper. We'd often spend weekends camping with the kids along the California coast or at national or state parks, such as Joshua Tree in the Desert, Sequoia National Park, Anzo Borrega, the Salton Sea, Morro Rock, Vasquez Rocks, Palm Desert, and San Diego, among other destinations. We had wonderful times camping out and enjoying nature. Diana would cook hearty breakfasts. A favorite of the family was eggs in a frame. Eggs were fried in a hole in the center of a piece of toast. Anything cooked in the great outdoors tasted better than home or restaurant cooking. Another favorite of the family, and especially of the kids, was what we called smellorama. We'd dig a trench about 2 to 3 feet long and about a foot deep and fill it with charcoal, which we ignited. When the coals were red or white hot, we'd wrap meat, onions, potatoes, peppers, etc. in tin foil and place the packet on the coals. Not only did it smell wonderful, hence the name Smellorama, but it tasted magnificent. We spent many a weekend and occasionally a full week camping and sightseeing. It was a great time in all our lives. Jimmy was now 11 years old and starting junior high. As a graduation present, I told him I would give him something that would be worthwhile only if I kept it. I promised him we would climb Mount Whitney, the highest mountain in the contiguous United States. The moral lesson I was trying to teach Jim was that if one gives his word or makes a promise, he must keep it. We drove to Whitney Portal and camped overnight at the 8,000-foot level. The following day, we climbed well above the tree line and at day's end camped near a glacier at about the 12,000-foot level. We had a tube tent and placed it between 2 huge boulders on a landscape resembling the surface of the moon. The following day, we climbed to the summit of Whitney, over 14,000 feet in altitude. The views during the climb and at the summit were spectacular. The ascent was physically difficult at times, and we both suffered from altitude sickness but urged each other on. We had conquered Whitney. After spending about 15 minutes at the summit, we began the long, arduous descent back to trail camp and home. It was a marvelous experience, and one that Jim and I have long cherished. I made it a point to spend a special time with each of my children. The Mount Whitney climb with Jim was a special time with him. I took Rachel on an overnight to Magic Mountain, an amusement park. We had a fantastic father and daughter weekend. There was a basketball throw concession, which if one got 3 baskets in a row, he was awarded a large stuffed animal. Rachel begged me to enter and win her an animal. The gods were good to us as I made all my throws, and Rachel walked off with her stuffed trophy. It was a special time for father and daughter. Peter belonged to an organization called Indian Guides. This organization was founded on the premise that fathers and sons should spend time together, and the organization was a vehicle to achieve this end. My special time with Peter was an overnight trip with the Indian Guides to Catalina, an island off the coast of California. We traveled out to the island by boat and slept on the floor of a simple shelter. We spent time alone together roaming the island. Peter was about 6 years old at the time. The trip back to Los Angeles by boat was scary. The waves were high and it was stormy. I don't think that Peter or the other kids realized how close the boat came to being swamped because of the unusually high waves and winds. We were both happy to arrive safely back home, but thrilled with the experience of our special time together. All my children were and are special to me, and I love them all dearly and equally. I've always tried to make each of them know this, and also to foster their love and respect for each other. While at Lytton, I did business with a small company in Maryland by the name of Hydronautics. While negotiating with them, I kept their president, Phil Eisenberg, up until 2 a.m. finalizing a deal. A few weeks later, he called me during lunch hour. I was at my desk eating a sandwich, as I often ate in. He invited me out to dinner and inquired if I was interested in moving back to the East Coast. It was at this time that all the major procurements for the DD 963 program were completed, and there was a move to transfer the whole Lytton procurement department to Pascagoula, Mississippi, where the shipyard was located and where the actual construction of the ships would take place. I wasn't thrilled with the idea of moving to Pascagoula and was intrigued with the idea of moving back east where most of my family was located. Hydronautics made me an offer I couldn't refuse. They flew me back to Maryland several times, and I had to be interviewed by each member of their board of directors. Hydronautics was located outside Columbia, Maryland. Columbia was a beautiful planned community in its early stages of development. Its concept was to be fully integrated both economically and ethnically, and its early residents were for the most part idealistic and liberal thinking. It had bike paths and neighborhood centers and was developing a large shopping mall. Its schools were open and within walking distance of many of the homes. In short, Columbia seemed almost too good to be true. Both Diana and I were enthralled with the concept and thrilled with the thought that our children could be brought up in such an environment. Chapter 11. The Columbia, Maryland Years. Hydronautics offered me the position of Vice President of Legal and Administration, stock options, and a significant increase over what I was earning at Lytton. I accepted the position. In 1972, we left California and moved to Columbia, Maryland. The trip across the USA was wonderful. We all piled into our Volkswagen pop-top camper. It was a wonderful camper with a tent we could attach to the open side sliding door, which increased the living area considerably. We did a lot of camping across the country and visited some wonderful natural and historic sites. Among them were Mesa Verde National Park, Sunset Crater, the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, Wapatki Indian Ruins, Kayenta, the Air Force Academy, Wolf Creek Pass over the Rocky Mountains, rolling fields of wheat and corn in the country's breadbasket, Chicago's Sears Tower, and the Appalachians on our way to Columbia. Every day we'd start out early with the 3 kids asleep in their pajamas in the back of the VW. We'd wake them up for breakfast and they'd get dressed and prepare for another exciting and educational day on the road. We made an effort to stop by 3 or 4 every afternoon, and if we were stopping at a hotel instead of camping, the order of the day was swimming. It took us close to 2 weeks on our historic family journey across the United States. The beginning of the Weiner family sojourn in Columbia, Maryland was anything but auspicious. The Beacons Moving Company arrived 2 days late with our household goods and other car and tried to unload them at our rented house. I refused to accept the goods because there had been a fire on the moving van and all our clothing and goods were charred and reeked of smoke. We stayed in a hotel for about a week while Diana and I went out and purchased new mattresses upon which we eventually slept on the floor of our rented house. After a prolonged hassle with the insurance company, we eventually reached a fair monetary settlement for the losses we sustained. For years after our move, every time we saw a Beacons moving van, we would express our displeasure with the company by loud booing and hissing. In less than a year, we purchased a new home, and soon were living in a 4-bedroom, 2-story Dutch colonial house with a full basement. We lived in this house on 4938 Reedy Brook Lane for the next 20 years. Columbia was an idyllic town. When we moved there, the population was just under 17,000, and most of the new town's residences were committed to the ideals which its founder, James Rouse, envisioned. As I write this biography in the year 2007, the population of Columbia exceeds 110,000 and has massive traffic problems. Columbia was a great place for our children to grow up. We developed lifelong friendships there and played an active role in the Jewish community. Our congregation was known as the Columbia Jewish Congregation, CJC, and was unaffiliated with any movement, such as the Orthodox, Conservative, or Reformed. Under the leadership of Rabbi Martin Siegel, we were an innovative congregation. We wrote our own prayer book. Rachel had her bat mitzvah, and Peter his bar mitzvah at the CJC. Jimmy had his at the wall in Jerusalem, Israel. My responsibilities at Hydronautics were manifold. I had contracts, administration, finance, intellectual property, and all corporate legal affairs under my aegis. I worked closely with outside counsel. With respect to intellectual property, I coordinated all matters with the law firm of Finnegan, Henderson, Faribault, and Garrett. On other legal issues, I worked with the Covington and Burling, Washington, D.C. office. Bill Stanley, a senior partner at Covington, was on the board of directors at Hydronautics, and I worked very closely with him. We went to England, Bulgaria, and France together to resolve an issue involving the Bulgarian ship Hydrodynamic Center in Varna, Bulgaria, but more about that international arbitration later. Hydronautics had a subsidiary company in Rehovot, Israel. This necessitated my making many trips to Israel. On my first trip to Israel, I was reunited with my brother-in-law, Meir, in an emotional reunion. I hadn't seen Meir for several years, and it was a wonderful and memorable event. On my many trips to Israel, I often stayed with Meir and Nava, his wife, at their 38 Koreh Hadaret 4th floor apartment in Jerusalem. I slept on their living room couch and usually stayed up late reading books Meir provided. One book I remember was entitled The Tanks of Tammuz, the true story of the Israeli Armored Corps and how they performed in battle and conquered the Golan Heights from the Syrians. The businesses Hydronautics had in Israel were named Scientech and Mamish. They ultimately failed. We had great difficulty with both and often referred to Mamish as mishmash. But they did outstanding research work in 2 fields, porous tube technology and kidney dialysis. With regard to the latter, I traveled with Clint Brown, a very competent and innovative senior scientist from Hydronautics, to a kidney dialysis ward in Beersheba, in the Negev. I had negotiated a license agreement with a German company for their technology for indwelling peritoneal dialysis, and Clint and I wanted to see how it was working on an experimental basis at the clinic in the Negev. We were staying at the Hilton in Tel Aviv. So after we concluded out business in Beersheba, I took a shortcut up the coast to save time in driving back to Tel Aviv. Before we knew it, we were in a dusty, unpaved road, shanty town-like city. It was Gaza City. I turned to Clint and commented, "Oh, we're in trouble." He, not being Jewish, replied, We laughed and got out of Gaza as fast as we could and arrived safely back in Tel Aviv. This was back in the 70s after the Six-Day War and long before the Intifada took root. My experiences in Israel on behalf of hydronautics resulted in my developing a strong personal and professional relationship with Yaakov Gatan, an Israeli attorney. He was extremely helpful in steering me through the Israeli bureaucracy, legalisms, and court system. As an example of Gotan's help, I offer the following. Hydronautics provided its Israeli subsidiary with U.S. government-furnished equipment to complete experimental work as a subcontractor to its parent company, Hydronautics. The subsidiary went defunct, and one of the principals of the failed subsidiary misappropriated the government-furnished equipment, GFE, and started his own new company. We sued him to recover the GFE he had misappropriated. With Gotan at my side, we went to court in Israel. The proceedings were entirely in Hebrew, except for my testimony, which of course was in English. We won the case, and the GFE was returned to Hydronautics, which returned it to its rightful owner, the United States government. Gotan also was instrumental in helping me get several thousands of dollars back from the Israeli government when bonds that were set aside for employees of the failed company became due. This required several trips by me to Israel as the bonds matured, and I took money out of the country. At that time, under the Begin administration, it was illegal to take U.S. currency out of Israel. I recall one incident where I had several $1,000s in Swiss francs on my person and was in an elevator on the 5th floor of a small apartment building when a large, swarthy, complexioned, burly and tough-looking man entered the elevator and stared at me. Diana was with me at the time. I was anxious to get out of the elevator with the cash, but the elevator stopped at every floor on the way down to the lobby. It was the Sabbath, and the elevator was programmed to stop at each floor so the Orthodox wouldn't have to push a button on the Sabbath. The burly guy kept staring at me, or was it my imagination, until we finally arrived safely at the lobby and I emerged in a cold sweat from the confines of the elevator with my Swiss francs securely in hand. In 1973, not long after I joined Hydronautics, the family traveled to Israel for Jimmy's bar mitzvah. It was a wonderful, celebratory, and uplifting experience for the entire extended family. The ceremony was held at the Western Wall of the Temple in Jerusalem. Papa Harry, Diana's father, had arranged the entire affair and had hired a rabbi to conduct the bar mitzvah service. When we arrived at the hotel, I asked who the rabbi was. Papa Harry remarked that he was the man with the beard. I looked around the swirling masses of people praying and saw that almost every man there had a beard. Eventually, we found the rabbi, and he conducted Jimmy's service adjacent to the fence, which separated the men from the women so that the women in the family could participate in the rite, which marked Jimmy's passage from boyhood to manhood. We had a big feast at the Holy Land Hotel. Subsequent to the bar mitzvah, the entire family went to Eilat, where we celebrated Passover and swam in the Red Sea. Peter got terribly sunburned, but Nava, who was a nurse, swathed Leban, or yogurt, on his back, and this relieved the pain, and he recovered. It was a memorable time as the Israeli and American cousins got to know each other and developed a lasting close relationship, which followed them all into adulthood and is extant as I write this autobiography many, many years after Jim's bar mitzvah. When Rachel was 15 years old, she was discontent with high school. One day she was due home in the late afternoon to meet with Diana. She failed to show up or call. This was most unlike her. We called her friends to see if she was at their homes. She was not. We went to the mall to try and find her, but didn't. As the hours passed and we didn't hear from Rachel, we called the police to report her missing. Diana and I were in total anguish. We imagined the worst and prayed for the best. The police checked the lake and searched for her bike. It was a horrible night for Diana and me, as we couldn't sleep and alternately hugged each other and cried in each other's arms. The following day, we learned that she had withdrawn some money from her bank account. This was good news, as it implied she had planned to run away and most likely had not been abducted as we had feared. 5 days went by, and there was no word from Rachel. On Diana's birthday, she received a birthday card from Rachel, postmarked New York. We knew she was in New York City. We had renewed hope. The telephone rang, and I answered it. There was no one on the other end of the line, but I sensed it was Rachel. We had the call traced and learned the call originated from an apartment complex in New York. Many of our friends in Colombia came by the house during this period to lend support and counsel. We got professional advice and encouragement. Again, the phone rang. I could hear someone on the other end of the line. I wanted to confirm that it was, in fact, Rachel. When the kids were small, we learned a nonsense phrase that we used in the family. It was ref zeg norb saperduglian. I said, if you are really Rachel, finish this saying. And I said, ref zeg norb, and breathlessly awaited her response. Rachel said, saperduglian. We knew she was all right, and the nightmare of her missing was coming to an end. We were advised by the experts in these matters that she would contact us when she was ready to return home. She did. She called again later that day and said she'd be at the Empire State Building the next day at 11 a.m. We instructed Jimmy to drive up to New York with Peter and not to come back without Rachel. Rachel returned home with Jim and Peter, and we welcomed her with open arms and much love. We were thrilled to see she was okay, and per the advice of experts, did not question her about why she ran away or what she did during her absence. We just hugged her and told her we loved her. Eventually, the story came out. She did not run away because of us or anything Diana or I said or did. She was totally discontented with school and her perceived shallowness of her classmates. Chapter 12: Hydronautics and Beyond. We lived in Colombia for 20 years. The first 10 years I was employed by Hydronautics. During the last few years of my employ, Hydronautics was bought by Tracor, a multinational firm, and became known as Tracor Hydronautics. After the acquisition, I started consulting part-time for the architect of the Capitol's legal division. My responsibilities at Hydronautics were in the very capable hands of Harvey Post, the controller, and Joe Binder, the contracts manager, both of whom reported to me. My activities at the architect of the Capitol involved claims arising out of construction of the new, at that time, James Madison Memorial Library building, which was an extension of the Library of Congress. I also was involved in negotiating and settling claims arising out of the construction and repair of the Capitol Power Plant. It was interesting work, and I was well compensated for it. While at Hydronautics, I had several interesting experiences. Two which stand out in mind are the Osprey 990 program and the Bulgarian Ship Hydrodynamic Center episodes. The Osprey 990 program was a U.S. Navy program in which the Navy was modifying a Vietnam-era riverboat to be a testbed for a Garrett Corporation 990 gas turbine engine. Hydronautics was the prime contractor, and we subcontracted the boat modification portion of the task to Barber Boat Works in New Bern, North Carolina. The boat's hull was modified and all the components of its new propulsion system were procured and installed on the craft, except the Garrett 990 engines, which the Navy was supplying as government-furnished equipment. The Navy had a separate development contract with Garrett for the gas turbine engines. The engines failed their tests, and Garrett wanted an additional amount of money to correct the failure. Instead of coming up with the $50,000 to $100,000 needed to rectify the problem and successfully complete the project, the Navy terminated the contract for its convenience. The U.S. government had already expended several $1 million on the program. It cost the government several $100,000 in termination costs. We at Hydronautics made more money on the program than the value of the contract because of the termination costs. The senator from North Carolina ranted on the floor of the U.S. Senate about the insanity and wastefulness of the Navy in canceling the Osprey program. The ill-fated program made headlines in the New Bern Leader newspaper, but that was not the end of the story. Because the Navy had paid for all the work done on the craft, the government owned the craft. We at Hydronautics awaited disposition instructions from the Navy. They came. We were ordered to send the Osprey 990 modified craft to the Cherry Point Marine Base. The end of this amazing saga of government waste and incompetence came when the Marines used the multi-million-dollar boat for target practice. The second incident I mentioned above involved the United Nations and the Bulgarian Ship Hydrodynamic Center in Varna, Bulgaria, under contract through the United Nations International Maritime Organization, IMCO, based in London. Hydronautics was to supply Bulgaria with a large amplitude hydrodynamic planar motion mechanism, LAHPM, for use in their Varna, Bulgaria hydrodynamic towing tank. We manufactured the item, and the Bulgarian Ship Hydrodynamic Center, BSHC, sent 2 of its scientists/engineers to our facility in Laurel, Maryland. The Bulgarian representatives were Evgeny Milanov and Vladimir Chetukov. They stayed with Diana and I in our home and watched American TV till all hours and read extensively the encyclopedias we had and other Western literature to which they did not have access in then communist Bulgaria. They stayed for 3 weeks of training. After delivery of the LAHPM to Bulgaria and its installation by hydronautics personnel and several successful test runs by the Bulgarian personnel, we invoiced the United Nations, IMCO, for the price set out in the contract. The Bulgarians refused to approve payment, and we took them to arbitration before an International Chamber of Commerce arbitrator, Sir Cedric Barclay by name, to resolve the matter. The hearing was held in Paris, France, because it was considered neutral ground. As the hearing entered its 3rd day of testimony, Vladimir Chetukov took the stand. We asked him if he had received 3 weeks of training in the U.S. at the hydronautics facility. He nodded his head vertically and pronounced loudly, "Niet!" We repeated the question, and again he nodded yes, but exclaimed no in a loud Russian, "Niet!" We quickly learned that in Bulgaria, a nodding vertically meant no. He was then confronted with a telegram sent by Dr. Bogdanov, head of BSHC, to us at Hydronautics, which thanked us profusely for the wonderful training we had provided to Mrs. Chetukov and Milanov during their 3-week stay at Hydronautics. This was before emails and the internet. Case closed. We won, and the money due us was paid. While at Hydronautics, my duties took me to such diverse places as Israel, England, France, Bulgaria, Greece, Turkey, Germany, Japan, and South Korea. After 10 years at Traeger Hydronautics, I formed my own consulting company in 1982 called the Phineas Company. As the Phineas Company, I did a lot of consulting work for and with Sigma Associates, which was a company formed by Howard Marks. Howard was my cost/price analyst at Lytton, and the two of us developed a fast friendship and deep respect for each other's professional capabilities. Sigma Associates won several major consulting jobs in which I participated. The Pullman claims. We prepared a consolidated request for equitable adjustment, REA, for the law firm of Sidley and Austin in Chicago. The REA was in excess of $240 million and was on behalf of the Pullman Corporation against Amtrak. I commuted to Chicago every Monday morning from BWI and worked with the Sigma team preparing the claims. We ultimately recovered a substantial sum for Pullman in arbitration. The Husky Oil defense. Sigma was retained by Husky Oil Company, which was defending claims against it by the U.S. Department of Interior. Husky Oil had a contract to work on the North Slope Alaskan pipeline. It had several subcontractors under contract at the beginning of the project, but about 8 years into the effort, most of them had either ceased to exist or were no longer under contract. The resolution of this conflict required me to take several trips to Alaska. U.S. Postal Service. I was retained by the Postal Service on their FDRS program to establish and monitor their source selection processes. This program lasted several months and was a huge success. The SNEP program. This was a U.S. Navy program to develop and modernize bases for the Saudi Arabian Navy in both Jeddah and Jubail. I traveled to Saudi to monitor performance and prepare claims against the Corps of Engineers, who were the construction agent of the U.S. government. We represented a subsidiary of LTV, a Dallas-based company, U.S. Postal Service Y2K program. Based on my performance on the source selection contract, I was retained as outside counsel on the Y2K program. This program was instituted in late 1998 as computer programming glitches had the world alarmed about what would happen when computers had to register the change of the century from the 1900s to 2000s. It was a major monetary boost for me and enabled me to build my retirement fund to a comfortable level. One of the major benefits of the program, Diana and I were living in West Virginia by then, was that I got to spend time with Jimmy and stayed at his apartment 3 days a week. We had long talks and ate terrible food at a nearby Denny's for supper some of the time. At other times, we dined at nice restaurants on Wisconsin or Connecticut avenues. During this time, I also did a lot of teaching for American Graduate University on the subjects of government procurement and contract law. Some of the seminars were public and some were held at company locations. I instructed contracts and program management personnel from most of the major defense industry Fortune 500 companies. My work as the Phineas Company took me to several of these United States and many foreign countries. Among the more challenging and exotic countries where I traveled were Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, China, Japan, and Korea. Chapter 13, Far East Adventures. In June of 1988, Diana and I took a trip to the Orient. The following are excerpts from my diary of the trip. June 2nd, 1988, stayed at the Marriott Hotel at DIA, had going-away dinner with Jim, Rach, Pete, Henry, and Kathy, Jim's first wife. Both Dee Dee, my nickname for Diana, and I had an afternoon dip in the pool. Up at 6 a.m. on June 2nd, flight departed at 8 a.m., flight to LA, first leg, was uneventful and pleasant, good food and drink. Flight from LA to Tokyo, Narita, was long. 2 movies, 2 meals, snacks, and constant daylight. Slept about 3 hours. Dee Dee didn't sleep much more. Arrived Narita Airport at about 3 p.m. Japanese were very efficient. Baggage and customs were fast, money changing, no hassle. An airport limo to the Akasaka Prince Hotel, comfortable. Arrived at hotel at 6 p.m., checked in and confirmed half rate both for Tokyo and for Kyoto. Took bath and decided to nap from about 7 p.m. for an hour or so. Slept until after midnight and then on and off for the rest of the night until 7 a.m. Both Dee Dee and I awoke very well rested. First full day, weather sunny and warm, had breakfast at the coffee shop in the hotel and signed up for the dynastic all-day tour of Tokyo. The tour proved to be very interesting. We visited the following sites: Tokyo Tower, Asakusa Kannon Temple, Shinzanso Garden Restaurant for lunch, the Imperial East Garden, Meiji Shrine. The view from the Tokyo Tower was worthwhile as we were able to see majestic Mount Fuji quite clearly. We were a bit rushed by our tour guide, so we couldn't spend time in the schlock shops. Asakusa Temple was a lovely experience. It is Tokyo's oldest and most famous Buddhist temple. Leading up to the temple grounds was an avenue flanked by shopping stalls. We spent some time roaming about looking at the wares of these shops. One of the flight stewardesses on the plane had told us that Japanese fly swatters make good gifts. We looked but didn't see any. After leaving the temple grounds, we drove, via our tour bus, through heavy traffic to the Chinatown restaurant. This was an elegant Japanese version of Martin's West. An opulent-looking, modern, multi-floored structure served as the housing for several weddings being held concurrently on the beautiful terraced gardens and in the many halls. Our guide informed us that 53 weddings would be held by day's end. We witnessed several wedding participants in their beautiful kimonos and traditional costumes. The meal we had was excellent, with 6 people per table, a la Benihana style. Food consisted of grilled veal, pork, steak, chicken, vegetables, and steamed rice and miso soup. After lunch, we walked around the beautiful gardens with its bridges and waterfalls. We got lost in the building and were the last ones back to the tour bus, which didn't set too well with our punctilious and dour tour guide. We next visited the magnificent Imperial Gardens and then went to the Tasaki Pearl Gallery, where we witnessed an instructive presentation on how man-made pearls are made by inserting a round piece of shell into the sex organs of a 3-year-old oyster and leaving it there for at least 3 years. We next went to the Meiji Jingu Shinto Shrine, the largest shrine of Japan's native religion. We were particularly impressed with the magnificent grounds and the size of the shrine itself. We got back to the hotel around 5 p.m. and rested and slept until almost 8:15 p.m. We then went out and walked in the Akasaka section near the hotel and found a small noodle restaurant where no one spoke English. We pointed to what we wanted and had a delicious meal. We got back to the hotel around 11 and planned our trip to visit Kamakura tomorrow. Second full day, sunny and warm, June 5th. Up at 7:30 a.m. and finished breakfast by 8:30 a.m. Took the subway from Akasaka Amitsuke to Shimbashi, where we switched to the railroad and took the Yokosuka line for 55 minutes to Kamakura. We were met at the railroad station by 3 students who offered to be our guides to enable them to practice their English. We had read that the Japanese government sanctioned the student organization doing this, so we decided to let them guide us. One spoke fair English, the chief guide spoke poorly, and the third student, a reporter, spoke even less. With their guidance, we visited the following landmarks: Heisei Kannon Temple, the Great Buddha, Daibutsu, Hachiman-gu Shrine, Hokokuji Temple. We walked from the railroad station to the Heisei Kannon Temple. It is a magnificent complex dating back to the 700s and up to the late 1300s. The main feature of the 8-building temple complex is the 11-faced image of Kannon, the largest wooden sculpture in Japan. No pictures were allowed. After our visit to the Heisei Kannon Temple, we hiked to the most dramatic site, the Great Buddha, over 730 years old. Much to our surprise, we were permitted inside the Great Buddha statue, much the same as tourists in the U.S. go inside the Statue of Liberty. From the outside, the statue was dignified and awe-inspiring. We then walked in the hot sun to the Hawimangu Shrine, where Diana purchased a fortune, which was written entirely in Japanese. Her guide, Tom, tried to translate it into English for her, but had great difficulty. Diana threatened good-naturedly to flunk him in English if he failed to complete the translation. He eventually did, and Diana's fortune turned out okay. We concluded our tour of Kamakura with a visit to Hokokuji Temple. This temple is surrounded by a magnificent bamboo forest, in the midst of which we had green tea. We returned to the railroad station shortly after 3 p.m. and bid our 3 guides sayonara. Diana promised to send them Washington, D.C. t-shirts. She did when we returned to D.C. We boarded the train for Tokyo and retraced our steps to arrive back at the hotel before 5. After a rest, shower, and bath, we ventured back out into the Akasaka district for supper. We came upon a fish restaurant and entered. A menu was presented depicting a dinner for 2 featuring a red bream fish. We pointed, they nodded, and an Epicurean adventure began. Firstly, a live fish, presumably a red bream, was netted from a pool in the center of the restaurant. It was dumped into a large open wicker basket and presented flapping and flipping to us for our approval. We nodded. They smiled, and the living, flipping fish vanished into the kitchen. 3 to 5 minutes later, a large round dish about 2 feet in diameter piled with ice appeared. Mounted on this crushed ice pile on spikes was the fish we'd just seen and selected. A ramp-like structure, composed of a leaf on the ice, led up to the fish. On this leaf, sashimi was presented, the flesh cut from the side of the spiked fish, the head, tail, and bleeding body, minus the central part of its flesh, still twitched and eyed us as we ate its sashimi. The once bright, shiny eyes turned slowly dull and lost their luster as their owner's twitching subsided. At about the same time, we emptied the ramp of its contents. The waitress removed the fish platter. This was not the last we were to see of our friend Twitch. 6 additional courses were served using the remaining parts of Twitch: tempura skin, miso fish soup, rice with shrimp potage-type chowder. The Twitch came back to the table, course by course and piece by piece, until at last the head, eyes, and all were devoured, or, in our case, discarded. The meal was tasty, filling, and an experience we'll not soon forget. We walked back to the hotel and sacked out by 10:30. Third full day, sunny and warm, June 6th. Up at 5:30 a.m. and prepared for trip to Kyoto. Ate breakfast Ion Coffee Shop and exchanged pleasantries with 2 Australian couples. 6:30 a.m. checked out of the hotel and taxied to the railroad station, where we boarded our 7:24 bullet train for Kyoto. We arrived at Kyoto Station at 10:10 a.m., schlepped our luggage, 4 bags, 2 travel kits, and Diana's purse, over to the subway, took the subway to the end of the line, and taxied to the hotel, where we arrived before 11 a.m. The hotel was magnificent. We were greeted royally, and a welcoming tea was brought to our room. We then took the hotel shuttle bus to Kyoto Railroad Station, where we walked to meet up with a tour at the new Miyako Hotel. We had time to spare before the tour started, so we went back to the railroad station and ate a boxed lunch. The tour began at 1:40. We visited the following sites: Sanju Sanjendo Hall, Heian Shrine, Kiyomiao Temple. The Sanju Sanjendo Temple consisted of a long building with multiple tiered rows of life-size figures of Kannon, 1,000 of them in all, each one with a different face and different features. Each figure had multiple arms, 40, each holding a symbol representative of a human trait. And above each life-size head were 11 smaller heads representing the human conditions. That is sadness, happiness, etc. In a word, astounding. Because this temple was a national holy place, we had to remove our shoes before entering. Next, we went to the Heian Temple and saw dramatic vermilion-colored edifices with a beautiful garden containing ponds, carp, stepping stones, and cool pathways. After the beauty of the Heian Shrine located in the heart of the city, we drove to the mountain temple of Kiyomazu. The approach to this temple was up a steep, narrow street flanked by many shops selling all kinds of items, but chiefly pottery. The street is nicknamed Teapot or Teacup Street. After walking the gamut of the Teacup Street, we ascended the stairs leading to the temple. The Kiyomizu Temple is set in the side of a forested mountain and affords one a fantastic view of the city of Kyoto. A gorgeously dramatic 3-tiered vermilion pagoda accents the temple grounds. At the base of the temple grounds, mountain water runs to a spring, which is said to be holy and charmed, and provide those who drink it with wisdom. Several school children lined up to drink the water. Elsewhere on the grounds was the infamous Love Rock. Children of all ages sought out this site. We returned from the tour to the new Miyako Hotel and just missed our shuttle bus back to our hotel, so we went back into the RR station, ate dinner, and subwayed and taxied our way back to our hotel, where we arrived at 7:30 p.m. exhausted from a long, long day. I took a hot bath and hit the sack before 9 p.m. Didi did likewise, and we slept until after 8 the following morning. Fourth full day, June 7th. Sunny and very warm. We decided to do things on our own today. Ate an American breakfast in the hotel and then took a taxi to the Kinkakuji Golden Temple, or Golden Pavilion, a Zen Buddhist temple. It was perhaps the most beautiful of all the temples we'd seen, set in a reflecting pond and surrounded by trees and mountain pathways. Gardeners were constantly pruning trees, moss, and cleaning the walkways of fallen leaves. Words are inadequate to capture its splendor, awe, and serenity. The Golden Pavilion seemed to capture the essence of what Kyoto was and is all about. After our visit to Kinkakuji, we taxied to the 7-story Kyoto Craft Center for some serious shopping. We spent a few hours going from floor to floor, looking at everything from pearls, cloisonne, damascene, kimonos, happy coats, and yakutas to dolls, toys, etc. We ended up buying some yakutas, coats, and kimonos. We dashed back to the railroad station, but failed to find our way to the shuttle. This turned out to be fortuitous, as we happened upon a huge, beautiful shopping mall in the lower level of the station. We window shopped and came upon an ice cream parlor/restaurant. By pointing to the plastic models of the parlor's offerings, menu, we made ourselves understood, and Didi had a fruit and ice cream dish while I had pasta and coffee. Several high school girls, all skinny as a rail, wolfed down huge sundaes with large helpings of ice cream, bananas, toppings, and more. Mystery. How do they all stay so thin? Around 3 p.m., we subwayed back toward the hotel and then taxied from the subway terminus. We're now real experts on transportation systems of Kyoto. Back at the hotel, we visited the gift shop, and Diana bought a beautiful damascene black 24-karat gold butterfly necklace. We napped for a while and wrote postcards, and then took the hotel shuttle bus to Gion Corner. The bus was packed with Japanese businessmen attending a 3M conference at the hotel. They were all going out to eat at a 200-year-old restaurant not far from our destination at Gion Corner. They were in high spirits, laughing and joking all the way into town. Some of them were kimono manufacturers learning the virtues of 3M's Scotch Guard. Diana and I arrived near Gion Corner, and after checking where and when to buy tickets, decided to look for a nearby restaurant as it was around 7 p.m., and we had until 8:30 p.m. before the show we were going to see began. We found a restaurant which we felt would provide a good transition meal from Japan to Hong Kong, which was our next day's destination. We ordered Kyoto box dinners, bento boxes, which were compartmentalized boxes with different servings in its own separate compartment. The meal was served quickly, and the quality was acceptable. It was still only 7:45, so on a whim, we decided to go into a pachinko parlor. The place was hopping with slot machines and pachinkos running. I bought 500 yen, about $4 worth of change, and Diana and I sat down at adjoining machines and started to play. After about 10 minutes, I was out of money, but Diana was on a roll. She could do nothing wrong as the coins mounted in her collection tray. Lights started flashing, bells went off, and the pachinko parlor manager came over and helped her play all the options. We both were now teamed up at Diana's machine. I pressed the start button. Diana and the manager fed in coins. Diana pushed the select buttons. Her luck held. The coins piled up. Finally, at 8:05 p.m., the machine rattled to a halt and the words, "Game's over," flashed. We took Diana's winnings to the counter and were given several wrapped sticks bound by a rubber band and were told, in sign language, to follow a designated fellow. We followed him for a few blocks, and then he led us to a seedy-looking side street where we walked up to what looked like an old-fashioned speakeasy. He knocked on a window, like a horse racing betting window, which opened a crack. A hand reached out and took Diana's package of sticks. A moment later, the hand reappeared and reached out to give Diana her winnings of about 5,900 yen. Not bad for a 500 yen investment and 20 minutes of time. Diana and I were in great spirits as we headed back for the Gion Corner show. At the Gion Corner show, we were treated to the following traditional Japanese activities: tea ceremony, koto music, flower arrangement, traditional imperial palace music and dance, kyogen, comedy of ski dealers, miyako and geisha, and bunraku puppets. 2 volunteers were needed for the tea ceremony, so I was one, and an Israeli was the other. The entire show was only an hour, but gave us a look at several aspects of the traditional Japanese art forms. We taxied back to the hotel and packed in readiness for our departure tomorrow for Hong Kong. 5th full day, fair and hot, June 8th, travel day. Up at 5:30 a.m. for a continental breakfast in our hotel room, check out, and taxi to Kyoto Railroad Station. Lugged luggage and boarded a bullet train to Shinkansen for Tokyo at 8:50 a.m. We arrived in Tokyo at 11 a.m. and caught an airport limo to Narita Airport. We arrived at Narita at about 1:15 p.m. and rested in the first-class lounge. The plane left a few minutes late. The flight was uneventful. The food on the flight was good and plentiful. I had a Doers on the rocks and slept. Diana read. We arrived in Hong Kong at 7:30 p.m. and at the Hotel Hong Kong at about 9 p.m. We checked in and received a message that the tour would pick us up in the hotel lobby at 8:50 a.m. Walked around the hotel and familiarized ourselves with the territory. We went to bed around 11 p.m. 6th, full day, Hong Kong, June 9th. Weather sunny and hot. This is where the accounts of the trip to the Far East end. Perhaps the rest of the journal will be added at some point. Chapter 14, West by God, Virginia. After living in Columbia for 20 years, Diana and I decided to build a log home near Shepherdstown, West Virginia, to use as a weekend retreat. We built a New England log home on 2.5 acres of wooded land bordering a nature preserve on the Potomac River. Diana bore the brunt of overseeing the construction as I was away in Salt Lake City, most of the time consulting on claims for the Eaton Kenway Corporation. She would drive out to West Virginia from Columbia every Wednesday to monitor construction and go with our builder, John Wood, to select kitchen cabinets and other accessories. We completed the home in 1991 and spent many a weekend there. We fell in love with the place and in 1992 sold our Columbia house and permanently moved to Logarithms, the name we gave to our West Virginia home. It was a beautiful house made of Georgia yellow pine and consisted of a great room, open kitchen, an eating bar, dining area, and full bath, and 2 bedrooms on the first floor. On the second floor were a loft, full bathroom, and master bedroom with a vaulted ceiling and stained glass windows. The cellar was finished into 3 areas. One half was the gray room, in which we had a cedar-lined walk-in closet for storage, a water purifying system, and dehumidifier. 1/3 was devoted to a computer room, and 1/3 was carpeted and served as a comfortable reading/study and extra bedroom for guests. Initially, we had wood-burning stoves in both the reading room and the great room. Subsequently, we had the reading room stove replaced by a gas-burning stove. It was wonderful on cold winter days to walk into the house and be greeted by the smell of burning logs and dry heat. We'd often sit on our wraparound porch and watch the white-tailed deer cross the property. Rabbits abounded, as did turkey vultures and an occasional wild turkey or red fox. We even had pet black snakes on the property. Our guests often commented that we lived in a Disneyland-like paradise. I loved chopping wood and clearing the land of wild-growing roses and brambles. It took me almost 6 years to get the land cleared and the felled trees sawed, chopped, and stacked into firewood. It kept me in relatively good shape, and I looked forward to returning to Logarithms when my teaching and consulting gigs necessitated my being away. There were 2 drawbacks to living in West Virginia. They were named Daniel and Pistol Pete. Daniel was a drug addict who dealt in drugs and lived in a nearby uncompleted home. He was erratic and often threatened people. A neighbor of ours who crossed Daniel's path and dared to challenge him had his house, which was under construction and nearly complete, mysteriously burned to the ground one evening. It was never proven who committed the arson, but every indication pointed to Daniel. The entire neighborhood was traumatized. Fortunately, the law caught up to him, and the last we heard, he was far away in California trying to evade capture. He was a most disturbing influence in the neighborhood. Because of him, we had an alarm and surveillance system installed in our house. Another dangerous character who lived 1 street away from us was Pistol Pete. He fancied himself a one-man law enforcement posse and carried a pistol overtly on his person. He openly threatened people in the neighborhood and had a mean streak in him. He purposely ran over a neighbor's dog and laughed about it. Pistol Pete met a terrible end. He was underneath his tractor repairing it when it slipped off its jacks and crushed him to death. He was found by neighbors about 3 days after his untimely demise. All these events contributed to Diana having a serious breakdown and bout of deep depression. We slowly worked our way back to her good health and enjoyed the few remaining years we had in West Virginia before moving to Riderwood. Riderwood is a retirement community located in Silver Spring, Maryland. After spending 13 years in West Virginia, we sold our log home at a handsome profit just as the real estate market hit its peak. Chapter 15, Riderwood. Within 2 months after we sold, the housing market hit bottom and people couldn't give away their homes. Several factors contributed to our move to Riderwood. We had observed Diana's parents deteriorate and wanted them to move to a retirement community where they could have assisted living help. Diana's father would not hear of it. Although in rapidly failing health in his last few years, he refused to admit outwardly the state of his diminishing physical and mental condition. He and my mother-in-law, Shirley, lived in Ogunquit, Maine, during the summer months, and in Green Acres, West Palm Beach, Florida, during the late fall and winter months. Every spring, they went to Israel to celebrate Passover with Meir and his family. It was a big worry for the family and difficult for Diana and her brothers. Harry died at the age of 95 while visiting Israel in 2006. He was buried in Jerusalem. Getting back to our decision to move to Riderwood, we didn't want to be a burden or worry to our children as we aged. Riderwood seemed to be an ideal solution for us and the family. It was located proximate to two of our children. Jimmy lived in Washington, D.C., and Rachel lived in Tacoma Park. Both were within a half hour or less of Riderwood. Diana was still recovering from the trauma of Daniel and Pistol Pete, and life at Riderwood would be less isolated and less stressful and demanding than in West Virginia. We moved into Riderwood in July of 2004. It represented a significant change in lifestyle for me. There were no more wild rose brushes for me to clear. I could no longer chop and stack firewood. Driving my beloved John Deere tractor mower to clear the constantly growing field grasses was a thing of the past. There were no deer greeting us across 2.5 acres of cleared meadowland every evening. We could no longer look out our bedroom windows and see red tailhawks circling overhead and rabbits scampering about the grounds. There was no nature conservancy in which we could take long walks along its cedar tree-wooded paths and view the Potomac River flowing far below from high above its riparian cliffs. When we first moved to West Virginia, there were no houses that we could see on our dirt-packed, unpaved street. We enjoyed the solitude. A year before we moved, all that changed. 3 houses were under construction on our street, including one across the cul-de-sac from our log home. Housing developments along Scrabble Road were beginning to spring up seemingly everywhere. The character of our neighborhood was being dramatically altered. My back was beginning to give me trouble, which made doing the chores, such as mowing and stacking wood, more burdensome than it ought to have been. The nearest store was about 4 to 5 miles away over narrow country roads. This necessitated frequent trips to keep our food in stock. Since Diana's bout with depression, she had lost her enthusiasm for cooking, and both our health concerns and welfare contributed to our decision to leave West Virginia. So we made the decision to move. I was 72 and Diana was 70 when we moved. Aside from some back problems, we were in relatively good health. We moved into our 4th floor 2-bedroom, 2 full bathrooms, and 800 square foot apartment at Riderwood. It was small compared to the 2,500 plus square foot log home we left behind, but it was comfortable with a breakfast bar separating the kitchen from the dining and living area. Large windows and a small outdoor porch area, which was accessible from the living room, overlooked a beautiful wooded quadrangle with a mixture of tree species that displayed a phantasmagoria of multicolored leaves in the fall. On many a fall morning, I'd sit on the porch sipping coffee and reading the Washington Post and doing the crossword puzzle. It was a pleasant and relaxing way of life. Cooking meals was no longer a chore for Diana, as we had 5 restaurants on the premises from which to choose, and our monthly fee entitled each of us to 1 free meal a day at any of the 5 restaurants. We usually ate breakfast at the breakfast counter in our apartment and had a sandwich or light lunch at home also. We almost always dined at one of the restaurants for supper. No cooking, no dishes, no cleanup. It was, and still is, an easy and less stressful lifestyle. In April of 2006, Diana's father died suddenly in Israel. She and her brother Jerry flew over to the funeral. It was a very stressful time for her. In September, Diana developed breast cancer and underwent surgery and both chemotherapy and radiation treatment. These treatments lasted until February of 2007 and left Diana without much energy. She lost all her hair as a result of the chemotherapy, but it did grow back by late spring. I drove her to her radiation treatments every day for 7 weeks. We also made several trips to her oncologist and for x-rays of various types. We were very supportive of one another throughout the ordeal and realized how fortunate we were to have each other and love one another. Meanwhile, while all this was happening, we were heavily involved in the settlement of her father's estate. Jerry, who is a certified financial planner, did the bulk of the estate work and relieved both Diana and her brother Martin of that burden. Diana's father left a large estate, several $1,000,000. One of the main assets of the estate was the majestic Regency Motel bordering the town of Ogunquit, Maine. Another was his ownership of 12 condominiums at the Lookout on Israel Head in Ogunquit. The Majestic was sold, and each of his children and grandchildren received $125,000 from the proceeds of the sale. Also, each of his 3 children, Diana, Martin, and Jerry, received ownership of a condominium at the Lookout in Ogunquit. We acquired a fourth-floor, two-bedroom, three-bath condo overlooking the swimming pool and with a view from the porch of the ocean. Diana and I spent 7 weeks there the first summer of 2007. More about this later. After Diana's father died, we moved Diana's mother, Shirley, age 94 at the time, in with us at Riderwood until we could get her into an assisted living apartment at Renaissance Gardens, which is located on the Riderwood campus. On August 17th of 2006, she moved into Renaissance Gardens. Diana visits her almost daily, and we often take her to dinner and off-campus to restaurants or to visit Rachel and Henry. She is a concern to us as she is in very frail physical condition but mentally quite sharp. She adapted relatively well to Renaissance Gardens, but we decided to take her back to Maine with us in the summer of 2007 to her house on 111 Meadowlark Lane in Ogunquit. We hired a wonderful caretaker for her by the name of Jean Darnell and flew her in from Florida to live with Shirley over the summer while she was in Maine. On August 5th, 2007, we celebrated Shirley's 95th birthday by having a party at the Lookout. It was a wonderful affair attended by the following family members: Diana and I, Mayor and Nava, Jerry and Susan, Kenny, Michael and Joshua Guerin, Mickey and Sharon Weiner. Other guests included Nancy and Ken Mills, the Majestic managers and caretakers for Shirley and Harry for many years, Jean Darnell, Shirley's caretaker that summer, and Stuart and Randy Rubenstein, friends of Jerry's and neighbors at the Lookout where Diana and I were staying that summer. Chapter 16, Summer 2007. My 74th birthday day. August 17th, 2007 turned out to be quite a day. Diana and I were in our condominium at the Lookout in Ogunquit, Maine. In the morning, Diana and I made plans to meet Mickey and Sharon in Portsmouth, New Hampshire for a Japanese meal to celebrate my birthday. We were in a festive mood. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, I received a phone call on my cell phone from Henry, my son-in-law. He told me he had bad news. It turned out to be terrible news. Rachel and Henry's house on 130 Ritchie Avenue in Tacoma Park, Maryland, had burned to the ground. They lost almost everything they owned in the fire. It was a tragic event and placed a pall over the entire day. We did meet Sharon and Mickey for dinner as planned, but the joy of the day was sadly missing because of the fire. We subsequently learned that Rachel had been sleeping when the fire broke out and that her dog Beauregard, Beau, barked loudly and jumped on her to awaken her in time to flee before the flames engulfed the room in which she had been napping. Beau was a true hero and rescued Rachel from what could have been a horrible outcome. I talked with Rachel and Henry several times by phone. As could be expected, they were devastated and in shock. Their friends rallied around them, and immediate support was forthcoming in the form of donated clothing and offers for housing. Jimmy was the first family member to see Rachel, and he gave her $1,000 in cash, as well as just the support of being there to help and lend moral support. Diana and I felt terrible that we were so far away and couldn't be of immediate help and support. I decided to fly down to Maryland on Monday the 20th and fly back on the same day. I left our condo at 4:30 in the morning to catch a flight out of Portland for Baltimore. I rented a car and drove to the temporary home where Rachel and Henry were staying. It was 102 Sunnyside Drive in Tacoma Park, about 2 blocks from their burned-out home. I arrived at that address about 9:30 a.m. and had a very emotional embrace with Henry. Rachel arrived shortly thereafter, and we embraced and cried together in the driveway, where I went out to greet her. She had taken the time to retrieve our mail, which was being saved at a post office in Silver Spring while we vacationed in Maine. Incredibly, Rachel had taken the time to run this errand to get our mail in the midst of all the misery and details of preparing for the fire insurance adjuster. I went to their burned-out house and was astounded at how completely the fire had destroyed the entire insides and the heat had melted Rachel's ornamental guitars. We talked and lunched together, and then I flew back to Maine. I felt much better having seen Rachel and Henry and knowing that they were coping well and had insurance to cover most of their loss. I arrived back in Maine about 5 p.m. On August 21st, Rachel and Henry sent the following email. A letter from Henry and Rachel Cross. August 21st, 2007. Dearest friends and family, we have finally surfaced enough to make contact with all of you, beloved people, but you have been in our hearts and minds all through this most extreme adventure. On Friday, August 21st, we lost our house to fire. We lost our house and most of our stuff. We have not lost our home. Our home is all of you. We have always felt the love and support of our community. We are incredibly moved and honored to be able to experience your love in this way. We feel that we are the luckiest two people, one dog and two birds in the world. There has not been one moment when we have been without shelter, clothing, food, or love. Speaking of clothing, Rachel has been the recipient of some very hip clothing. She says that you all have a much better fashion sense than she does. Henry has just been wearing the same thing every day, like he usually does. As far as housing, if we took all of you up on your offers to house us, we could spend the next 7 years going from one friend's place to another. Your generosity is amazing. We have found a house that will allow us to stay in the neighborhood while 130 Ritchie Avenue is being rebuilt. 130 Ritchie Avenue will once again become the Ritchie Avenue Cultural Center, but this time with central air. In the meantime, we will be residing in a beautiful little purple house. Our address for a while is Henry and Rachel Cross, 812 Gist Avenue, Silver Spring Avenue, 20910. We are fortunate to have insurance that will rebuild our house and replace most of our possessions. Unfortunately, our musical gear and instruments that we use for business are not covered. Henry's recording studio and several of his basses were lost, but miraculously, Rachel's 3 best guitars survived virtually unscathed. The cases are melted and scorched, but an angel protected the guitars. We are humbled by the heroic work and dedication of all the fire and rescue workers, the police force, and the Red Cross. These folks are superheroes. And finally, a word about Beauregard. He's the canine hero in all of this. We got him from the PG County Animal Shelter about a year and a half ago. He looked pretty ragged at the time, so we gave him the name Beauregard because it means handsome in French. Beauregard alerted Rachel to the fire by barking and jumping. We rescued him, and he rescued us. Remember, dog is God spelled backwards, corny but true. We are moving forward a little bit every day. We are so happy to be alive, and we love you all. Henry, Rachel, Beauregard, Sonny the Lovebird, and Stormy the Parakeet. The California Weiners visit. Soon after my arrival back at the Lookout, I received a call from Karen and Olivia informing me of their safe arrival at Logan Airport in Boston and that they were on their way to Maine. After a few phone calls in which I gave directions to Karen on how to get to our condominium, they arrived around 10 p.m. It was wonderful seeing Karen and Olivia. Olivia had grown and was a beautiful, almost 10-year-old young lady. Karen looked great, and we were all in good spirits, but quite tired. They from their long flight from California and drive from Boston, and me from my flight to Maryland and return on the same day. Ogunquit Visitors, Summer 2007. Rachel, Henry, and Andrew, Henry's nephew, visited before the fire, and Rachel flew up for a few days after the fire to see Diana and the California family. It was a pleasant summer. I went fishing with my brother Mickey twice, and we caught several bass and pickerel. Mickey and Sharon live in Durham, New Hampshire, which is less than an hour from Ogunquit. Diana and I also had several meals out with Mickey and Sharon. We also had a fantastic lobster feast at their home a few days after our arrival in Maine. They were kind enough to take care of our dog Dexter for the entire 7 weeks we were in Ogunquit, because dogs are not allowed in the Lookout condominium complex. Chapter 17, Alaskan Adventures. In addition to my having traveled to Alaska on business, hear Husky Oil claim in earlier chapters, I went back to that fantastic wilderness 3 times. Once with Diana on an elder hostel at Denali National Park, once with Diana, Hugh and Sherry Reddish, Jerry and Susan Guerin, and Heidi and Don Levy, and lastly, on a memorable fishing excursion with my brother Mickey, son Peter, and son-in-law Henry. The elder hostel was wonderful and educational. We learned all about the flora and fauna of the park. We saw some wildlife, but our only glimpse of Mount McKinley was on the train ride up from Anchorage when there was a brief break in the cloud cover. We were introduced to the winner of several Iditarod races and saw how he raised his sled dogs. We also courageously went whitewater rafting on the roiling gray glacial river. It was fun and a most enjoyable and informative experience. Several years later, we took a cruise from Vancouver, Canada, on the inner passageway up to Anchorage. It was a most interesting and uplifting experience. We visited several of the towns along our inner passage route. It was interesting to see how small and seemingly underdeveloped and sparsely populated they were. We sailed into Glacier Bay and enjoyed seeing the glaciers and watching and listening to them calving. After the cruise ship hit port, we stayed an extra week to do some land touring. We went back to Denali, but again were denied a glimpse of the mountain as it was enshrouded by clouds. We trained up to Fairbanks where we panned for gold and took a river cruise. It was an exhilarating 2 weeks. My last trip to Alaska, as of this writing, in the summer of 2011, was a king salmon fishing expedition with my brother, Mickey, Peter, and Henry. We had an extraordinary trip. We stayed at a fishing lodge on the Kenai Peninsula and fished for 3 days. We each caught our limit each day. We saw many moose and several eagles. It was a most memorable trip. Chapter 18, Granddaughters. (2008 to 2011). The next 4 years at Riderwood were largely uneventful. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, we played dominoes with our friends, the Kahns, Sherm Krasny, who eventually dropped out because of poor eyesight, Wendy Shane, Emil Jetmar, and Rita Dempsey. Every morning at 9 a.m., I met with a group of men by the coffee machine in the Montgomery Station lobby, one of the Riderwood community centers. We were known as the Liars Club and swapped stories for about an hour each day. I was the youngest in the group at age 76 and eventually age 78. When in Israel back in 1999, we visited Chaya Ben Joseph and her and Jimmy's daughter Mahal. It was the first time we met our Israeli granddaughter and immediately fell in love with her. It was a nice visit and Chaya served us a lovely meal. We took Mahal to the zoo in Jerusalem, led by our tour guide Gilad, my nephew and Meir's youngest son. Several years passed, and we didn't see Mahal again until the 21st century when she made several trips to visit her father, Jimmy, and her U.S. grandparents, Diana and I. Mahal first came to the States in the summer of 2009 and spent some time with us in Ogunquit and swimming in Little Sebago Lake at Jerry's camp. She was delightful, saw Singing in the Rain with us at the Ogunquit Playhouse, and immediately imitated the rain dance sequence. The previous summer, our granddaughter Olivia, Peter's daughter, had visited in Ogunquit, and we had a wonderful time with her. We took her to see My Fair Lady at the Ogunquit Playhouse, and she mimicked the singing and dancing of I Could Have Danced All Night. Although they had yet to meet, the two cousins, separated by thousands of miles and an ocean and 3 continents, already seemed to have a lot in common. Oji, Olivia's nickname, was fun to have visit and share both pool and ocean swimming with me, her grandpa. Oji and Moosh, Mahal's nickname, were to meet in Israel and become fast friends, but that story will be told a little later in this biography. In December of 2009 and into early 2010, Moosh came to the States again to visit and saw meaningful snowfall for the first time. It was a wonderful visit for Diana and I as we began to know Moosh better, and she in turn began to feel more comfortable with her American grandparents. Oji's bat mitzvah adventure. Diana and I, in concert with Peter and Karen, agreed to have Oji's bat mitzvah at the Wall in Israel. The trip was well planned, and the Weiner family, all 9 of us, flew from New York to Israel. Jim, Vicky, Peter, Karen, Oji, Rachel, Henry, Diana, and Phil. In Israel, we stayed at the Mount Zion Hotel, where we were joined by Moosh and Chaya for our welcoming dinner. Chaya left later in the evening, and Moosh and Oji stayed with us for the remainder of the trip. Tour, trek, adventure. We had our own bus and guide, Gadi Hadani. Suffice it to say, OG performed magnificently at her bat mitzvah service, which was held at Robinson's Arch. She read from the Torah and sang the prayers. Even the Israeli family was very impressed with her command of Hebrew as she recited her Torah portion and the opening and closing prayers. I felt a very deep and moving sense of pride in the way OG conducted herself and performed the service. I knew my dad would have loved to be a part of the ceremony, and in my heart, he was. OG's dad, my youngest son Peter, and Karen, his wife, were bursting with a sense of deep pleasure and satisfaction at the achievement of OG. In the evening subsequent to the bat mitzvah, we had a raucous dinner at the Mount Zion Hotel for the whole family, Americans and Israelis. Peter had arranged for a karaoke disc jockey, and everyone, particularly the younger folks, enjoyed participating in the singing and dancing. OG and Moosh sang together and bonded together, as we had hoped first cousins would. The days after the bat mitzvah were spent touring in Jerusalem, Masada, En-Gedi, Tiberias, the Golan, Kfar Blum, kayaking on the Jordan River, Haifa, Jaffa, Tel Aviv, archaeological digs, etc. The entire trip was well chronicled by my son Peter, who prepared a photo essay of the adventure, which is available in a separate document, a bound book to be reviewed by those interested. After the Israeli trip, Diana and I went to Ogunquit for the summer. We had a restful summer. It was at this time that I relinquished the reins of president of the Riderwood Jewish community to Mimi August. I had mentored her before leaving for Israel and also upon my return. She has proven to be an outstanding president of the RJC. In Ogunquit, we had the usual visitors, Frank and Diane, Mark and Jane, Selma and Irv. We also had the pleasure of my old college roommate Peter Foreman and his wife Liberta for a week. In addition to seeing the sights of Ogunquit, we drove up to Bowdoin, our alma mater, and on to El Bean. It was a nice visit. In February of 2011, we visited Pete and Liberta in Palm Desert, California for a few days. At the close of summer 2010, we went back to Riderwood and resumed our retirement community routine. In April of 2011, Moosh came to the States and we celebrated Passover together. I had the task, although a pleasant one, of leading the first Passover Seder for the Riderwood Jewish community. There were over 200 people in attendance: Mickey, Sharon, Billy, Levon, Sharon's sister, Jimmy, Victoria, Moosh, Matt, Suzanne, Sophia, Ruby, Diana, and I enjoyed the event. The second Seder was held at Rachel and Henry's house, where 28 people attended, including our family group from the Riderwood First Seder. It was a magnificent feast. Everyone had a great time and enjoyed the meal. Henry's famous turkey and Rachel's innovative dishes and desserts. The day following Rachel's Seder, Moosh, Jim, and Vicky flew to Los Angeles, where Moosh and OG had a reunion. They all went to Disneyland together and reportedly had a grand time. Upon their return to the East Coast, we had a nice farewell dinner at our Riderwood apartment. We provided Moosh with information on our family and its background to satisfy a school project she was working on. Chapter 19, Summer of 2011. In late May, we moved up to Ogunquit for our usual summer stay. Only this time it wasn't usual. We had decided to sell one of our condo units, but weren't having much success, so we rented it for a week in late June. In order to prepare the unit for our renters, we had to furnish the unit. This meant several trips to local and distant furniture stores and specialty shops. We procured a futon, queen-size bed and mattress, easy chair and ottoman, night tables and side tables, mattress covers and pillows, to name a few of the items. Other items consisted of cleaning supplies, shower curtains, bathroom supplies, etc. The first few weeks were far from restful, but full of accomplishment. We did take a day off and travel to LL Bean in Freeport, Maine. It was kind of an annual pilgrimage that we take. I bought some stuff I really didn't need, and Diana bought some stuff she felt she could use. We joined Mickey and Sharon for a drive to Hampton Beach to a place called the Beach Plum. Mickey told us to order the foot-long lobster roll and to share it, as one would be more than enough for the two of us. I secretly questioned this. He was right. The lobster roll was stuffed and overflowing with pure lobster. There was so much to eat that it took us several minutes of eating with a fork before we were able to work our way down through the fallen lobster meat. to the lobster meat in the roll. The beach plum was located on the shore, and we ate at a table under trees, enjoying the sea breezes as we stuffed ourselves with the contents of the foot-long. It was a very special summer with several memorable events. Rachel, Jimmy, and Peter rented a 5-bedroom old Victorian 2-towered house on a bluff overlooking the ocean at York Beach, 7 miles from Ogunquit, for a week in early August. The occupants of the house were Rachel, Henry, his 2 nephews Andrew and Joseph, Jimmy, Victoria, Jim's daughter Michal, and her cousin Yara, as well as Peter, Karen, and Olivia. Diana and I visited the gang, and we all had a wonderful cookout there, topped off with a huge whoopie pie. That week got off on a sad note as we learned that Victoria's father, George, had to be operated on for colon cancer. Fortunately, the operation was successful, and George pulled through with a hopeful prognosis. Vicky had stayed in Washington to be with her father and the family through the crises, but joined Jimmy at the York Beach house after her father's operation was over and he was out of immediate danger. The biggest event of the summer was a surprise 80th birthday party for my brother Mickey. It was held at Jonathan's restaurant in Ogunquit and was attended by over 90 friends and family. Mickey was totally surprised and stunned as he walked into the room and was greeted by a thunderous round of applause and happy birthdays. Relatives from all sides of the family were there, as well as old college buddies and his Durham men's basketball organization team members, aka Dumbo, and many other close friends. The party was organized by his daughter, Suzanne. I helped by selecting the venue for the party and making a financial contribution. Diana and I had several guests stay with us in our condominium, as well as in a unit that we also rent out. Our visitors included Irv and Selma Herzog, Mark and Jane Cohen, Peter, Karen and Olivia, Oji, Jim, Michal, Moosh, Ian, Nalina, and their children. We are expecting Frank and Diane Chethik a few weeks from the time of this wording. We made several visits to Jerry and Susan's summer home on Little Sebago Lake and partook of motorboat rides and enjoyed cookouts. One of the more memorable events of the summer was the get-together in Old Orchard Beach of the Documenting Maine jury group. My brother Mickey and his wife Sharon joined Diana and I at the reunion. We saw many old friends from our past whom we hadn't seen in decades. Among them were Sid Geller from Portland, a law school classmate of mine, Jack Rubin and his wife Renee from Lewiston, Auburn, Arthur Shepard from Lewiston, and members of the Wilner family. Stories were shared about the businesses our fathers and grandfathers started throughout the state of Maine. Also shared were stories of our experiences at Hebrew schools. Many spoke highly of Rabbi Barrett. We had a very scary episode in late August. Diana and I were walking down the steep grade of Israel Head Road from our condo when suddenly Diana lost consciousness and fell, sustaining bloody bruises to her cheek, upper lip, chin, and knees. She sat up dazed and did not know who she was or why she had fallen. She shortly regained her senses. We rushed her to the emergency urgent care unit in Wells, where they immediately started to monitor her heart and blood pressure. They cleansed her wounds and sent her to York Hospital via ambulance for 24-hour observation and further tests. She underwent tests such as X-ray, EKG, and echocardiogram, among others. Fortunately, all tests were negative and revealed no abnormalities. The doctor, William Coomey, released her after the 24 hours of observation and tests. He said whatever happened probably would not repeat itself. We surmised it was a sudden drop in blood pressure due to the medication Diana was taking. I must admit that I was very upset and scared. It was not pleasant driving back to our condominium alone after leaving Diana hooked up to all sorts of monitoring devices at the hospital. I had a fitful night's rest and spent most of the next day at the hospital with Diana until her release late in the afternoon. Mickey and Sharon came over the following day with chicken soup with matzo balls and deviled eggs. We ate well as Diana's bruises matured into scabs. Because of Diana's fall and subsequent hospitalization, we canceled our planned trip to the Bangor Music Festival where Henry and Rachel were working. We also canceled a trip to Bar Harbor where we planned on going after the Bangor Music Festival. As it turned out, even if Diana had not experienced the medical problem, we couldn't have gone anyway. An enormous hurricane/tropical storm named Irene slammed into the east coast of the United States on August 27, 2011, and caused havoc all along the east coast up to and including Maine. Fortunately, the power of the storm had moved slightly to the west and didn't cause too much damage to Ogunquit, which got heavy rains and 30-plus mile-an-hour winds. Transportation all along the east coast was disrupted. The weather eventually cleared, and along with Meyer and Nava, Diana and I spent a day and a half in Acadia National Park, where we shared magnificent scenery and stayed at a 100-year-old Victorian B&B. We met Mickey and Sharon several times during the summer for dinner at various restaurants in Portsmouth, Kittery, and Berwick. Great news from our granddaughters and Israeli niece June 2012. OG won an acting scholarship for an improv group and will be performing as a paid professional this summer. Her academic year was successful as she did well in school. At age 15, she is quite accomplished, and Diana and I are very proud of her. Michal was accepted to the Kirov Ballet School in Washington, D.C., and will attend rigorous classes there during the summer. She will stay with Jim and Victoria and hopefully be able to visit us in Maine before heading back to Israel. Chapter 20: Travel, Aging, and Religion. El Halavi will swim for Israel in the London Paralympics. She was one of only 3 women athletes selected to swim. What an honor! Diana and I will fly to London to cheer her on. An exciting 2012 year. After a fairly routine fall and winter at Riderwood, Diana and I traveled to London for the London 2012 Paralympics. It was an exciting time for the Israeli family and us as we witnessed El Halevi, our niece, compete representing the state of Israel. It was a wonderful, uplifting several days as thousands of people attended the Olympic events. The opening ceremonies were amazing and concluded with a fantastic fireworks display. The English people were magnificent and very hospitable and helpful. Signs were prevalent everywhere directing visitors to the Olympic venue, and huge symbols of the Paralympics hung from London Bridge and lampposts throughout London. We stayed at a Best Western hotel conveniently located near Victoria Station, from which we took the underground to our destinations. Meir, Nava, and the Halevi family also stayed at the same hotel. We arrived back at Riderwood after our 12-day stay in England and barely had time to unpack before getting ready for a national parks tour. I've always loved the outdoors and had a desire to visit our national parks. My desire to do so was satisfied when Diana and I toured the following parks and natural venues: Bryce Canyon, Zion, Lake Mead, Great Salt Lake, Grand Canyon's North Rim, Yellowstone, Cody, Wyoming, the Grand Tetons, vast Indian territories and reservations, Grand Coulee Dam, Crazy Horse, and Mount Rushmore. Each one was spectacular in its own right and extremely impressive and educational. Earlier, before our London adventure in the spring of the year, Diana and I flew to Salt Lake to celebrate Passover at my niece Suzanne's home. She, Matt, and the 2 girls, I called them Munchkins, as well as Matt's parents, Mickey and Sharon, Jimmy and Vicky, Rachel and Henry, and Peter, Karen, and OG attended. We all had a marvelous time. I conducted the Seder service, and everyone participated and enjoyed the sumptuous meal prepared by Suzanne. We spent most of the summer at our Ogunquit condo, with frequent visits with Mick and Sharon and day trips to Jerry and Susan's lake cottage. We had several visitors, including the California Weiners, the California Chethicks, the New Jersey Herzogs, the Washington, D.C. Weiners, the Armonk Cohens, both granddaughters also. A few weeks after their visit with us, Irv Herzog passed away. He had been in failing health for some time, but enjoyed his visit with us. He was a caring, kind-hearted person. Jerry, Susan, Diana, and I drove down to New Jersey for his funeral service and back the same day. Jerry did all the driving, but it was a long, tiring, emotional day for us all. One of the highlights of the summer was the day we spent with Moosh at Old Orchard Beach. It was delightful watching her have fun riding the bumper cars and screaming together as we rode the roller coaster. It was an altogether grandparents-granddaughter, lovely, fun-filled day. We celebrated the end of 2012 and rang in the new year of 2013 with Peter and his family in Los Angeles. I always enjoyed spending time with my youngest son and granddaughter, Olivia. We went to Chinatown and had delicious Chinese food. It was a nice visit. The year 2013. The first quarter of the year was a keen reminder of my mortality as I approached the age of 80 years. George Fleming, Vicky's father, passed away after a heroic 2+ year battle with colon cancer and heart disease. He was a wonderful man and died peacefully in his sleep. I received additional bad news when I learned that my cousin, Mark Cohen, has cancer, which had spread to his lungs. He is currently undergoing chemotherapy after weeks of radiation. He has difficulty walking and can no longer negotiate stairs. The prognosis is not optimistic. Diana is exhibiting some aches in her hands and legs, and I have rather strong pains in my back, which I seem to be able to mitigate by taking long walks. Such are the joys of aging. We are enjoying another summer in Ogunquit. Sam Levy and his wife Linda visited, and we, especially Diana and Sam, reminisced about the Guerin family. It was a nice visit and enjoyed by all of us. Diana and I flew back to Portland for a quick overnight visit to attend the memorial service for George Fleming. It was a very well-attended and moving event. Vicky and her sister Wanda did most of the planning for it. We stayed overnight with Rachel and Henry, and Jim and Vicky joined us for supper before Rachel drove us to the airport for our flight back to Portland and Ogunquit. Meanwhile, Peter and Karen are getting a divorce after 15 years of marriage. Peter is in constant contact with us, and Mom and I are doing all we can to support him and reduce his stress. They are in the middle of selling their house, and both Karen and Peter will have to find new and separate lodgings. OG will probably go with Peter and have frequent visitations with Karen. As I approach celebrating 8 decades on this planet, I thought it might be useful if I set down my thoughts on religion and end-of-life philosophy. Firstly, as to religion, while I am a lifelong Jew and have practiced my religion by attending some services and participating in several traditional ceremonies such as Purim, high holidays, and having led several Passover services both in my home and at Riderwood, I would not consider myself a religious person. I deeply believe in sustaining the traditional aspects of Judaism, but am ambivalent regarding the existence of a supreme being. I must admit, I vacillate somewhat in this area. I do not believe in the traditional hereafter, but reserve judgment on the existence of another dimension which conceivably could be attained after death. My logical self tends to believe that death is a final fact and nothing follows. Everything we observe in nature tends to support this conclusion. Animals die, their offspring carry on. Plants die, their seeds grow into new plants. People die, their offspring live on. I have no fear of death and am eternally grateful for the full and wonderful life I've been blessed to have. My biggest concern as I age is that I not become a burden to my wife Diana, if she survives me, and or my children. To this end, I've endeavored to keep all concerned parties aware of the details of my finances, will, location of important papers, and both personal and real property. But enough of this. As I write this segment of my biography, it is June 13th in the year 2013. I'm looking forward to a wonderful summer as I sit at my computer, authoring this in our condo in Ogunquit, Maine. Early on the morning of June 24th, we received a call from Vicky advising us that Jimmy had an accident while riding his bike to work and was in the hospital. He was pretty banged up, but fortunately was wearing a helmet, and this enabled him to avoid severe head trauma. We were kept advised as to his condition throughout the day and got to speak with him later in the afternoon. He was retained overnight at the hospital for observation and was released to go home the next morning, June 25th. The weather was true to Maine June weather, as most mornings found the ocean barely visible as the fog rolled in and obscured everything in its path. When the tide is out and the sun peeks through the clouds, usually in the mid to late afternoon, Diana and I take walks on the beach. It is very peaceful to hear the roaring tide and listen to the gulls calling one another as they discover clams, sand crabs, or, at best, vacationers' scraps of food. Early in August, the entire family rented a beautiful log home in Bar Harbor. Rachel, Henry, Jim, Vicky, Moosh, Peter, OG, Diana, and I, along with Moosh's friend Daria, moved into the log home. It was set in the woodsy area, 4 miles from the town of Bar Harbor, and had a view of Mount Cadillac. The home consisted of 5 bedrooms and 3 full baths. It also had a pool table and a foosball game, which were used extensively by the kids as well as the adults. While Jim and the girls went biking and Rachel and Henry went hiking, Diana and I spent our time sightseeing. This included ascending to the summit of Mount Cadillac for a magnificent view of the Ocean Bay and its many islands, a hike near Eagle Lake, and a carriage ride on Rockefeller's roads. To celebrate my 81st birthday, we all went out to eat at a harborside seafood restaurant in Bar Harbor, and then had dessert back in the log home, which the family had decorated, and prepared a table loaded with gifts for me. It was a most memorable occasion. Chapter 21, The COVID Years. (2021 to 2022), I'm now in my 80s. This decade, thus far, has been an interesting and challenging one. I've come to realize that as one ages, one must confront certain challenges. Most of them are physical limitations that slowly creep into one's physical and mental abilities. At age 88, my hearing has deserted me to the point that my hearing aids are an absolute necessity. Without them, I am essentially deaf. On the medical front, I have developed lung nodes and heart problems. More about this a bit later, and Diana's 2 trips to the hospital. To digress from my aging problems, the medical and political situation in the U.S. and the world has been significantly impacted, both by the COVID pandemic and by the advent of Donald Trumpism and Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Joe Biden roared to both a popular and electoral college victory over Trump in the 2021 elections. Trump defied both facts and tradition and imperiled our long-preserved traditions of democracy. His instigation on January 6, 2021, resulted in a massive attack on the Capitol in an effort to upset and sabotage the legislature's confirmation of the Electoral College votes. The Trump mob breached the Capitol, sending the legislators into protective hiding. While the Trump mob disrupted the vote, the legislature reconvened and in a late-night session confirmed the Electoral College vote under the leadership of Vice President Pence, who demonstrated enormous courage, in my opinion, by defying Trump and upholding the Constitution. The underpinnings of our democracy were severely eroded by the actions of Trump and his followers. 5 people were killed in the attack on the Capitol, and many of the highly outnumbered police and Capitol Guard forces were severely injured in the insurrection. Unless Trump and his followers are exposed and punished for their insurgency and disregard for the Constitution, I fear our democratic institutions are severely weakened, and our democratic republic is in grave danger. Meanwhile, an epidemic of mass killings has infested our schools, religious edifices, and shopping centers. Reluctance on the part of the Republican Party to make changes in the gun laws for fear of losing the financial support of the NRA continually hamper effective legislation curtailing certain types of weapons that were designed for combat and not for killing children and other innocent people. It is very disheartening to this 88-year-old to see the underpinnings of our democracy so vulnerable. To top the bad news off, Russia, under Putin, has invaded Ukraine and appears at this writing, June 13, 2022, to be winning after more than 100 days of war. The USA and its NATO partners have furnished arms to the Ukrainians, but fear to provide fighter jets and more advanced long-range weapons because of Putin's hints at using chemical and atomic weapons. Both Finland and Sweden are seeking NATO membership as they fear Russian intervention. So much for the disappointing domestic and foreign situation as it appears to me. Being 88 and about to turn 89, I believe, health-wise, I've been very fortunate. Both my pulmonologist and cardiologist have played an increasingly important role in my health care. My pulmonologist has been closely monitoring me for the past 3 years. My cardiologist has referred me to a cardiac surgeon. As a result, I underwent cardiac surgery to replace my deteriorating aorta valve in my heart. The procedure was minimally invasive and is known as TAVR, or transcatheter aortic valve replacement. I had the procedure done on June 2, 2022, and was released from the hospital the next day. Peter flew in from Utah the day before the operation. He stayed at our apartment and was very helpful and supportive. He drove me to the hospital at 5:30 a.m. on the day of the operation and stayed with me until they came for me and took me to be operated on. Amazingly, the surgeon who performed the procedure, along with Dr. John Trujillo, was an Israeli who helped develop the TAVR procedure in Israel. Dr. Nivad is an internationally renowned leader in cardiac surgery, and here he was operating on me at the Adventist Hospital about 3 blocks from our residence at Riderwood Village in Silver Spring, Maryland, USA. Diana had 2 bouts with hiatal hernia attacks in the latter part of 2021 and went to the hospital, once via ambulance. She was hydrated and spent the night after each episode in the hospital. Her diet since then has been quite restrictive, but essential to controlling the problem. It should be mentioned here that both Rachel and Jimmy were extremely helpful during and after both episodes, as if concerns for Diana weren't worry enough. Driving her home from the hospital, I was involved in a car accident and wound up in the hospital via ambulance. Fortunately, Diana was not injured, and after a one-night stand, I was released and came home. Mickey's wife Sharon passed away this year. She was an avid reader and had courageously battled diabetes and kidney failure for the last few years of her life. She and Mickey sold their Durham, New Hampshire home and moved into the Lookout condominium in Ogunquit, Maine. Diana and I invested over $40,000 in refurbishing their apartment, which Diana owned, and considering Mickey's employment loss and subsequently his significant loss of income, we leased the apartment to him and Sharon at a significantly reduced price. Sharon was laid to rest in Wells, Maine, on a freezing, wet, and icy, sleety day. Although the weather was horrid, several of Mickey's basketball buddies came to support him in the extremely inclement weather, and a few of Sharon's aging lady friends from the Lookout endured the wintry weather to bid goodbye to their friend. Suzanne, Jimmy, Ian, Mickey, Bill, and I had a lunch together at the Green Leaf restaurant and later gathered in our apartment and reminisced and shared stories late into the evening. Mickey's daughter, Suzanne, my niece, was extraordinarily instrumental in making all the arrangements. As I write this segment of my biography on this 14th day of June 2022, Diana and I look forward to going to Maine in early July, the 6th and 7th, with Jimmy doing most of the driving. We arrived in Maine on the 7th of July 2022. We were concerned with the continuing failure of the homeowner association to fix the leakage in and around our porch door. The visits from relatives were few as I recovered from my Tapir operation, but Cousin Erwin and Jan did visit, and we had a pleasant time reminiscing. We spent time with Mickey, who, as I wrote earlier, lived in the neighboring apartment. He was 90 years old, and it was a gift that we could spend time together. Suzanne and her brother Billy shipped Mickey's valuable stamp collections and memorabilia to Utah. Shortly thereafter, Mickey moved to an assisted living facility in Salt Lake. In early October, just as the fall leaves were beginning to turn, Rachel drove us home to Maryland from Ogunquit. Both Diana and I are so thankful that our children, Jimmy, Rachel, and Peter, visited and prepared meals for us. When we arrived back at our retirement community, I tested positive for COVID, and Diana tested negative. This epidemic has ravaged the world and impacted millions of lives. After being confined to our apartment for 2 weeks, we finally both tested negative and no longer required quarantine. Chapter 22: Life, Health, and Current Events. The kids planned a 90th birthday party for me, and it was wonderful. Relatives came from all over: Erwin and Jan, Meir and Nava, Steve Safran and Barbara, Ian, Nalina, Amita and Arun Pallenbaum, Avner, Michelle, and Yoni Garin, Billy and Vicky, Lee Safran, Jerry and Susan, Ken and Adar, Josh and Randy, Eli, Ronnie, and Noam, my immediate family who provided the entertainment and planned the affair, Rachel and Henry Cross, Jim Weiner and Vicky Fleming, and Peter Weiner, Lana Lane, and Olivia Weiner. A few days after the happiest of celebrations, my brother Mickey passed away at age 91 plus, and from the heights of happiness to the depths of grief, We and several of his basketball buddies bid him goodbye as he was laid to rest next to his wife Sharon in Wells, Maine. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched a surprise attack against Israel and killed over 1,200 Israelis and took over 1,000 hostages. It is December 28th, 2023, as I write this. Israel has unleashed air bombardments that have devastated Gaza. The air bombardments have killed over 20,000 Gazan Palestinians. Israeli ground forces have located and destroyed several Hamas tunnels. One negotiated ceasefire allowed for the exchange of hostages held by Hamas and the release of prisoners held by Israel. Israel's continual air bombing has taken a significant death toll on the civilian population of Gaza, and world opinion seems to have shifted to bring pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire. It is now January 2024. As I write this and the war in Gaza drags on, over 100 hostages are still held by Hamas. On a more pleasant note, we just had our first snowstorm of the year, January 15th, of about 3 inches, and it is beautiful to see. It is now August 19th, 2024, and the war in Gaza goes on with peace talks unencouragingly moving slowly on. Hamas still holds over 100 hostages. Israel has killed over 40,000 Palestinians, including women and children, and has been severely criticized throughout the world for this. Meanwhile, Hezbollah in Lebanon has increased its rocket attacks, threatening to open a second front against Israel. To increase the danger to Israel, Iran has threatened to seriously retaliate against Israel for its assassination of a top Iranian official. Diana and I have been in our condo in Ogunquit, Maine since early July. Jimmy, Rachel, and Henry have stopped by at various times. Henry has been extraordinary and helpful. We've had several visitors this month, among them Erwin and Jan Cohen, Steve and Lee Safran. For my 91st birthday on August 17th, Cindy and Matt, her husband, Avnir joyfully led the service, and we all joined in singing. Michelle cooked wonderful meals, and they were consumed with gusto. It was heartwarming to be reunited with our Israeli family. On a personal note, I might mention, as I write this, that at age 91, my hearing loss is slowly getting worse, even with my hearing aids. Also, because of the medication I take, I bruise very easily, but life goes on, and I'm very thankful and lucky to have the love and support of my family. Diana and I are still in love with each other as we approach our 67th wedding anniversary in January of 2025. The political scene in the USA is most interesting. President Biden dropped out of the race, and Harris, his VP, is the Democrats' choice to face Republican Trump. We'll have to wait until November, and the votes are counted for the results. If Democrat Harris wins, she will be our first female president. If she loses and Trump, a convicted felon, is elected, I feel our democracy and all it stands for is in serious jeopardy. It is now August 31st, 2024, as I write this portion of my autobiography, The War in Gaza Goes On. In the north, Hezbollah seems to be ramping up its attacks on Israel. At the same time, Iran has yet to carry out its threatened retaliatory attacks against Israel. Meanwhile, Israel has carried out massive military action on the West Bank against Arab terrorists. This essentially has Israel fighting a 3-front war. The U.S. has deployed 2 carrier forces to discourage Iranian action against Israel. Several family members from Israel visited Ogunquit, and it was wonderful that Diana and I had the chance to see them. We plan to leave Ogunquit on the 3rd of September and return to our Riderwood apartment. Diana came down with a case of shingles, which necessitated our going to the York Hospital facility in Wells. They diagnosed her medical situation and prescribed medication, which they ordered from the pharmacy in Wells. Diana's outbreak of shingles was on her forehead and dangerously near her right eye. It was painful and worrisome. Jim arrived by train from Washington to drive us home to Maryland. It was necessary to delay our trip home for 4 days until Diana's condition improved. So our summer vacation came to a stressful conclusion. Iran carried out a massive missile attack on Israel. Israel's defense missiles, Iron Dome, shot down most of the Iranians' missiles, and no Israeli between the warring deaths or serious damage was reported. The U.S. fleet in the western Mediterranean Sea also intercepted many of the Iranian missiles and drones. The world is on edge regarding the yet-to-occur Israeli response to the Iranian attack. It is now March 2025. Israel and Hamas has completed stage 1 of a hostage exchange. Several Israeli corpses, along with surviving hostages, were returned to Israel in the exchange. Back in November, Trump was elected president and took office in January 2025. Since then, he and Elon Musk have, in my opinion, seriously undermined our democracy. It's now, June 1st, 2025. The war in Gaza goes on. Israel keeps bombing Gaza and Hamas targets. Over 50,000 Gazans have been killed by Israel, and world opinion is growing against Israel. Yet, under Netanyahu's leadership, the war goes on amid continuing negotiations between the warring parties, Israel and Hamas. World opinion is turning against Israel, and anti-Semitism is growing worldwide. On a happier note, we celebrated Diana's 90th birthday with relatives at a fancy hotel English-type tea. This was a party arranged by Rachel and was a big success. Shortly after the celebration, Rachel went on her third 500-mile trek. This one was across northern Spain. Meanwhile, Jimmy continued to be of enormous help to Diana and me. He undertook and arranged for help from Riderwood's Home Assistant Program, while at the same time negotiating with UNUM on Diana's continuing care insurance. He also has undertaken to pay all my and Diana's bills as they come due, but with our money. Jim has been a true blessing to me as he has undertaken so many tasks that I am no longer capable of handling. Meanwhile, out in Utah, my youngest son, Peter, has his own business creating videos for various clients. He is enormously creative and talented. He has met a wonderful woman, Lana, and the two of them will be traveling to Scotland where they will get married and tour for a few weeks this summer of 2025. Diana and I have often discussed how fortunate we are to have such wonderful children. As I age, I am becoming more philosophical about life and death. I've spent more time on doctor's appointments and in caring for Diana, who has mild dementia and is unable to do many household tasks. It is difficult to adjust to the aging process, but I accept the fact that being almost 92 years of age as I write this autobiography is a blessing. So, while my hearing is not so good, my hearing aids are excellent, and I can still hear quite clearly when I use them. My eyesight is okay, but I need reading glasses to read the paper and books. I notice that I tire more easily and don't get enough exercise. While I am reluctant to admit it, in 2 close calls driving home from Maine last summer, I barely avoided 2 accidents. Now I drive only to the giant grocery store, which is 3 blocks from Riderwood, where Diana and I live. While I have a state of Maryland driver's license valid until August 20th, 2099, I plan on giving up driving except for groceries, sometime shortly after I celebrate my 92nd birthday. I will still drive to Rachel and Henry's on occasion. As I continue to write in my autobiography, the news at home and in the USA and around the world is getting worse. It is now mid-June of 2025, and the major upsetting events are Israel and Iran are at a full-scale war with drones and anti-drone armaments being fired at each other's countries. Israel initiated the attack on Iran in an attempt to weaken or destroy her nuclear bomb development progress. Iran has responded with bombings of Haifa and other Israeli cities with moderate success, as Israel's Iron Dome defensive systems have moderate success in downing incoming Iranian drones. On the political front here in America, President Trump held a military parade in Washington, D.C. It was modestly attended, while millions throughout the United States marched in protests against Trump and his growing militaristic regime. The division in U.S. society is terrifying, as Trump has endeavored to deport longtime non-citizens from the country. While the country has a growing chasm between the Republican far right and the Democrats' weakening left, the United States is in serious danger under Trump of reverting to the kind of schisms that tore the country apart before the Civil War, and then later in the Depression years. It took the genius of an Abraham Lincoln to save the country and the tenacity of Franklin Roosevelt to save our democracy. But enough of these distressing observations. Diana and I plan on going to our Maine condo in early July. Meanwhile, although this is my biography, events occurring around the world cannot be ignored. On June 22nd, the U.S. bombed 3 of Iran's nuclear sites. Iran has partially responded by bombing Tel Aviv with long-range rockets. Although they were mostly intercepted, some got through Israel's Iron Dome defensives and caused damage to Tel Aviv. The U.S. attack on Iran's nuclear facilities was carried out without congressional consultation and approval. While many approved of the U.S. action and Trump's decision-making without congressional approval, which has always been required before military action, such action was illegal without congressional approval. More on this later as Iran's actions clarify. Israel and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire. There are mixed reports on the effects of the U.S. bombing strike on Iran's nuclear underground facilities. The weather in Maryland has been dangerously hot. For the last few days, it has been over 90 degrees. So much for the naysayers about climate change. It is June 26th in the year 2025 as I write this section of my biography. Both Diana and I, accompanied by Rachel, will be flying up to our main lookout condo on July 10th. Henry will drive up a few days earlier with all our luggage. Diana and I plan on staying in Maine until sometime in August when Jim will drive us home. We have been fortunate to have a professional caregiver, Joyce, to help Diana 3 days a week. She has taken over many of the tasks that I did. It has made my job caring for Diana much less difficult. Fortunately, Diana's dementia is mild, and she is coping with it wonderfully. As I approach age 92, I recognize a diminishment in both my memory and physical stamina, but I am generally in pretty good health and cheerful as well as thankful. Both Diana and I, in our 90s, now recognize we have a lot to be thankful for. Thinking back over the years, I believe that even with all the disheartening political turmoil, Jimmy Stewart was right when he starred in It's a Wonderful Life. It is now the last day of June in the year 2025. The weather here in Maryland has been in the 90s for several days now. Diana has not been very active and slept for most of the last 2 days. It is worrisome. In just 10 days, we are scheduled to fly to Maine and settle into our condo for a few months to enjoy the cool Maine ocean breezes. Rachel has made arrangements to meet with professional caregivers to aid Diana. Keep listening for more information on how that all turned out. Sunday, July 20th, 2025, turned out to be a day to remember. I decided to spend the whole day with Diana and let us have some fun together. We drove to Kittery Trading Post, and Diana spent over an hour looking at clothes and enjoying herself. We then went to When Pigs Fly and bought a couple of loaves of bread. Heading back to Ogunquit, we stopped in at the Chinese restaurant and ate supper. It was raining hard at this time. We arrived back at the lookout while it was still light out. I dropped Diana off, and she went into the lookout while I parked the car. She usually waits for me in the lobby after I park the car, and we go up to our apartment together. Diana was not in the lobby waiting for me as usual. I figured that she went up to our apartment, so I went up. Our apartment is on the 4th floor, and the door was locked. I went in, and no lights were on, and Diana was not there. I thought she may have stopped to visit her brother on the 2nd floor. She was not there. I was now very concerned as she was missing for over a half hour. A young lady came by and helped me look for her. She yelled to me that she found Diana. I rushed to her. She was sitting on the stairs on the far side of the lookout from our apartment, looking dazed and very confused. She did not remember where our apartment was or what floor it was on. I took her upstairs to our condo where she regained her senses and normal awareness. Fortunately, we had hired a caregiver for Diana, and she turned out to be excellent. Her name was Tammy. She undertook tasks that gave me relief, such as doing the laundry, disposing of rubbish, vacuuming the floors, preparing lunch for Diana, and taking Diana for walks. She was a tremendous help to both Diana and me. We had several relatives visit us as the summer days waned. Erwin and Jan, Mayir and Nava stayed in their apartment at the lookout. Avnir, Michelle, and Yoni stayed in Mayir's apartment as the summer waned and fall approached. Before Avnir and family arrived, Mayir fell, and he and Nava returned quickly to Israel. Mayir had aged noticeably. Jimmy flew up from D.C. to help prepare for the trip home with Diana. Before they left, Peter flew in from Utah to help me drive back to Maryland. It was the first time since his summer wedding in Scotland to Lana that we had seen him. He had kept us up to date with wedding pictures and photos from places they visited in Scotland and England. Lana made a beautiful bride, and Diana and I are thrilled that she is now part of our family. Jim flew home to Maryland with Diana. The next day, Peter and I drove home to Maryland. Peter did all the driving. While we expected the drive to be easy and uneventful, it turned out to be an unwanted adventure. After stopping in Connecticut for brunch, the shit began to hit the proverbial fan. We got caught in a huge traffic jam, and Peter got messages on his computer ranging from warnings of long delays, possible alternate routes, and changing advisories. After a significant delay, the traffic moved past a horrific accident scene, and we were in the clear and on our way toward the Tappan Zee Bridge. All went well until about a half mile from the Delaware end of the New Jersey Turnpike. We blew a tire. We pulled off the road, and Peter put on the spare tire. Peter was amazing. We drove to the end of the turnpike to the nearest gas station, where Peter was informed the nearest tire place was a Firestone garage and store. We crossed the Delaware Bridge and headed toward the Firestone garage. When we got to within less than a tenth of a mile of the garage, we came to a railroad crossing, and the crossing bars came down just as we approached. We thought we were going to be delayed. It was 6:40 p.m. and the garage closed at 7 p.m. We made it to the garage in time, and the mechanic took off the spare tire that Peter had put on and replaced it with a Firestone tire. We were at last on our way home. Again. We stopped at the Maryland house for a snack and arrived safely home at Riderwood close to 10 p.m. What should have been an 8-hour trip took 14 hours. September 17th, 2025. Meanwhile, the war against Hamas continues as Israel relentlessly attacks Gaza City and forces its civilian population to flee. World opinion sees Israel's continuing advance militarily into Gaza as genocide, and criticism against Israel has increased throughout the world. Hamas still holds 20 Israeli hostages, and Israel has sworn to continue fighting until Hamas is defeated. Here in the USA, a popular right-wing Republican, Charlie Kirk, was assassinated, and the political polarization in the country seems to be out of control. As I witness such vindictiveness in the country, I have a growing feeling that America has lost its sense of democracy and is in real danger of slipping into a semi-dictatorship under Trump. With Trump's tariffs and political appointments, the United States is in a very dangerous period. The rise of China and its alliance with the Soviet Union under Putin, plus North Korea, constitutes a significant threat to our democracy. October 2nd, 2025, and the U.S. government has shut down as the Republicans and the Democrats failed to reach agreement. Meanwhile, the Israelis and Hamas are meeting in Egypt, trying to agree on a final peace agreement to end the war in Gaza and return Israeli hostages. Israel has demanded the total disarmament of Hamas. The meeting commenced this morning, October 6th, 2025. Keep listening for the results. Agreement has been reached, and the 20 surviving Israeli hostages held by Hamas have been released and returned to Israel. Hundreds of Hamas prisoners held by Israel have been freed and returned to Gaza. The exchange of prisoners took place on October 12th and 13th in an historic agreement. President Trump flew to Israel, where he addressed a packed and thankful Knesset. He was applauded by standing ovations as he asserted that a new era of peace in the Middle East was attainable. After addressing a packed Israeli Knesset, Trump flew to Egypt for further discussions with several countries' representatives to address the possible future for Gaza and the entire Mideast. It is now October 27th, 2025, as I write this. The LA Dodgers and the Toronto teams are tied at 3 games each in the 7-game World Series. Breaking news as I write this. Dodgers win on a home run in the 9th inning to tie the game and go on to win the baseball 2025 World Series. In the NFL, the Washington Commanders are struggling as they fight many injuries. November 2025. Diana and I had a pleasant Thanksgiving dinner with Jimmy, Vicky, Henry, and Rachel at a nice restaurant. As Diana and I age, we become aware of how wonderful and caring our children are. December 2025. As we age, we tend to have less resistance to certain diseases. Both Diana and I have cancer growths that are scheduled for surgery and analysis early in February 2026. While we are hopeful that things will turn out all right, we are aware of our growing fatigues and need for rest. I'm 92 years old as I write this and am acutely aware that I tire easily. Diana is 90 and requires more sleep than I do. Our children seem to be aware that we are both slowly failing. Peter calls us more frequently, and Rachel and Henry are more attentive and visit frequently, often bringing meals for us with them. Also, Rachel keeps in close touch with us. Jimmy has been fantastic as he has undertaken all the financial aspects of both Diana and myself. He also visits us frequently. Vicky often visits with him and spends time talking with Diana. These are some of my observations as we are about to celebrate the new year 2026. January 1st, 2026. The big news story is the U.S. military operation in Venezuela and the capture of Maduro. Maduro allies in Venezuela are still in power and have large support within the country. President Trump has stated the U.S. will take over control of the country and its large petroleum assets until free elections take place. Trump has warned Canada, Greenland, Mexico, and others that what happened in Venezuela could happen to them. In my opinion, I strongly disagree with Trump's policies and actions without notifying Congress before taking such military actions and seeking their approval and advice. The United States under Trump is acting more and more like a dictatorship than a democracy. He has flaunted Congress and threatened other countries. The scariest thing about his actions is the support he is receiving from a Republican-dominated Congress. On the home front, both bad and good news. Diana was taken by ambulance to the hospital, suffering from dizziness and nausea. Rachel came over while Diana was still home and helped the medics and Diana prepare for her trip via ambulance to the hospital. I rode in the ambulance with Diana. Rachel stayed with Diana all night until the hospital deemed Diana in good enough condition to return home at 4 a.m. Rachel drove Diana home and stayed the rest of the night, or should I say morning, at our apartment at Riderwood. She had insisted I go home from the hospital at around 11 p.m., which I did. So much for the bad news. The good news is that Diana made a full recovery, the 14th of January, 2026. Now, back to the international news. Iran is experiencing massive gatherings against its administration. Over 1,000 citizens have been reported killed as they revolted against the Ayatollah and his administration. The U.S. is reportedly moving some troops and equipment out of its bases near Iran. Meanwhile, President Trump, while threatening some undefined action against Iran, is stepping up the pressure on Greenland. Trump's endangering the NATO alliance by threatening a takeover of Greenland, which is owned by NATO partner Denmark. Enough said about Trump and his unexplainable and dangerous foreign policy. Jimmy visited Diana and I today and provided us with valuable information and documents for us to sign. He has been a wonderful help in providing the necessary guidance to both Diana and me as we age and lose some of our cognitive abilities. We feel truly blessed to have such wonderful and caring and knowledgeable children. Last night we celebrated our 68th wedding anniversary. As I was on our 3-step ladder to retrieve a vase for the flowers I bought for Diana, it slipped and I tumbled to the kitchen floor. Aside from a few bruises to my legs and shoulder, I seem to be okay. One might say Diana and I had a bang-up 68th anniversary party. This last week in January 20th, 2026 and early February 2026 have been horrific as the entire East Coast, as well as most of the eastern ocean-bordering states, have been unable to free their cars. Because of the temperatures remaining well below freezing both day and night, many homes in the D.C. area are snowbound. Fortunately, Diana and I live in a retirement community, and our apartment is well heated, and the parking lots are available to remove the frozen ice and shovel the snow so we can free our cars. March to April 2026. The United States and Israel attacked Iran in massive bombings. The Iranian Ayatollah was killed, as well as many major Iranian military personnel. Iran retaliated by sending rockets into Israel and many of its Iranian enemies' countries. As I write this, both Israel and the Americans in Israel were told to evacuate. The United States continue their bombings of Iran, and Iran has retaliated by sending rockets into Israel, most of which were destroyed prior to reaching their targets. The war widens as I write this, and Israel fights the Hezbollah in Lebanon as well as fighting Iran. Russia has aided Iran with target information as the war threatens to spread. Chapter 23, The Hospital Tapes.
It's now July 2nd in the year 2026, and I'm lying here resting in the hospital bed, recuperating, and it's been very interesting. I've appreciated tremendous support from the family. I've been here for 6 days, and you know something? I'd like to get out of here. It's funny, but I do a lot of philosophical thinking, and my personal thoughts are that I've been very fortunate. I've had a terrifically exciting life. I've been to over 24 different countries, and professionally, I've had a very successful life, fortunately. And I got a fantastic family. Well, Peter, Rachel, and Jim. Peter flew all night to be here at the hospital to help support me and boost my spirits. My spirits are pretty good considering the bullshit I'm going through. It's an interesting experience. They come in all hours of the day and night and give me shots and take blood. But the hospital, I'm in the Adventist hospital, which is only about 2.5 blocks from where we live in Riderwood. So, my philosophy is very simple. I'm 92 years old. I've had one operation which was not successful, and they said it might not be. And so I was spending my time loafing in bed. I got a book that Henry gave me about the new astrophysics for people in a hurry. And I gotta tell you, you need a PhD just to read this book. But it's very, very interesting. So he's been nice, and everyone's been wonderful. I get visitors. Henry's sister came in late yesterday afternoon, early evening, and I had a nice visit with her. She's they're a nice family. And she said a prayer for me, and that was wonderful. And we had a nice talk, and we talked about the wonderful times we all had up in Maine. Peter rented a cottage, and we had a big cookout. The family was there, Henry was there, kids were there, and I remember all of that. The treatment here at the Adventist hospital, where I spent the last week on vacation, in parentheses, close parentheses. But I'll be okay. Rachel and Jimmy and Peter have been very supportive. Peter, when he heard I was in the hospital, flew overnight to arrive early in the morning, 5 o'clock. And so he left his work, and I'm really proud of our 3 children. Peter's doing well. He married a wonderful girl. I met her several times. We stayed, Bud and I stayed overnight at their place when we visited in Salt Lake City. And that was wonderful. She's part of the family now, and we're thrilled for him. Jimmy is happily married, and Rachel and Henry are happily married. And if the truth be told, I'm 92 years old, going on 93 next month, if I'm lucky enough to get to 93. But in terms of my feelings about being in a hospital for a week, and I operated once, and that was not successful, You know, I'm very philosophical. I know my family is doing very well. They're all healthy, and they're all happily married. You know, my thoughts as I lie here in a hospital bed on July 2nd in the year 2026. So I'm very thankful for the life I've led, and I'm more than thankful for my family, you know, Jenny and Rachel and Peter, not necessarily in that order, but necessarily in that order because of ages. And Jimmy's been terrific. He's taken over all of my financial businesses, and pays rent, pays all my bills, and keeps everybody informed within the family that needs to know what's going on. And Rachel's been great. She comes and she does all the shopping for us. Usually on Monday mornings, she'll go to the Giant and bring back healthy foods, trying to get me to eat them. And no, it's great. She does all the shopping for me. And I'm lying down here in the hospital bed, and Peter's standing beside me, recording all of this so I can put it in my biography. And my thoughts on life are, I've been more than fortunate. I've had an extremely interesting life. I've seen the world. I've had a great family. We've gone, when they were little kids, we lived in California and we camped out a lot, and it was fun. We, as a family, we did a lot of things as a family. And of course, Jimmy was very interesting kid when he was growing up, and he drew all kinds of pictures, and he drew. We lived in San Jose. He drew an entire plumbing system as he envisioned it underground. He's a weird kid, and he loved to take off and just climb buildings, go to the roofs, and look around when we lived in Los Angeles. Peter and I went with a group where dads and Indian guides were supposed to stay together, and Peter and I had a good time. We went to stay overnight to the Catalina Island off the coast of California, and that was interesting. We stayed overnight, slept on the floor, froze our tails off, and then coming back, it was huge. It was very, very wavy, you know, and in the water. And the rich kids flew back, and we came back treacherously through the growing waves. And as you know, by my writing this, we made it safely, or I wouldn't be writing this. It's, you know, now my philosophy on life as we approach, you know, the end of it, it's you know, it's time. I've had, personally, I feel blessed to have the family I have. I have 3 wonderful children, and so, you know, I'm 92, and unless I can recover, you know, and feel good, I'm ready to go. My philosophy is, you know, if I'm going to have to lie in bed or I'm not going to be able to take care of myself, it's going to be a burden, not only on me, but particularly on the family. So, you know, They've all visited me here in the hospital. Every day someone, either Diana or Peter or Henry or Rachel, they all come, and it's great to have visitors because you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I've had a great life. I've had a very adventurous life in my job as an attorney. I've been privileged to work initially with the Central Intelligence Agency, and that's all I'm going to say about that. And then we moved to California, and that story you can read up above. I am not afraid. I'm sad, but I'm ready, for God's sakes, I'll be 93 if I'm lucky. in next month, the 17th of August. So I have zero regrets about my life, and I'm not afraid to go, and I'm ready, and the kids for sure are ready, and nobody's happy about it, but it is what it is. And if God willing, I'll surprise a lot of people and come out of this okay. And the most surprised one will be me. I'll do what the doctors say, and we're going to just hope. So, summarizing everything up, I have a wonderful family. I love my 3 children. I love to see them work together, be together, plan together, support each other. My only regret at this stage is that my wife Diana, who I love deeply, has to go through this. But I think, it's a funny thing. She's forgetful, and maybe it's a blessing. And so I think she's ready to do without me if she has to be. And I feel great that my 3 children are here to support her. And she's been the love of my life for over 68 years. We've been married, and I guess 3 or 4 years before we were married. So I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of my children. And if it's time to go, I'm ready to go. If it's not time to go, I'm ready to raise hell the rest of my life.